Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Tracer Burnout. I'm Dan.
And I'm Roger.
And today we have a unique guest.
Yes, we do.
But before we do that, some admin stuff.
Okay.
So, our listeners and viewers continue to grow. Our audience continues to expand across the globe. And as soon as I have something figured out on how to process all that stuff on YouTube, then I will, of course, update the audience. However, for the audio-only listeners, the downloads are going very well, especially in Fort Lauderdale, Florida.
We would like to thank our friends in the Sunshine State. Thank you.
Mother of God.
Okay.
There are somebody, or several somebodies, obviously, is passing around the word like crazy in Fort Lauderdale.
Thank you.
Keep it up. Everybody else, you should do the same.
For the other 49 states, I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed. We're doing this again. Good stuff. Okay. Also update, our good friends at Aerial Resupply Coffee have provided us with this pretty sweet coin. We'll do a little close-up for our watching viewers to see it. So on one side it says Aerial Resupply Coffee. Yep. What's the other side say? Freedom,
Liberty, Coffee, and America. And of course there's a hulked out bald eagle holding an ARC mug. That is pretty sweet.
I don't know how you can have biceps like that if you don't have thumbs, but it's very patriotic and it's caffeine, and we appreciate our friends over there sending us the coin. We'll put it in the swag area here in the studio as it continues to grow.
Yep.
Head over to Aerial Resupply Coffee, use Tracer Burnout, get a nice little 10% off. You can also go to our website, tracerburnout.com, and click the affiliate link at the banner at the very top. That works as well. So Thanks to our good friends over there.
Yeah. Speaking of friends, friend of the show Keith asked us a question when we put out the stuff on the social medias. And his question was, what goes into the selection process for people that we have on the show?
Okay.
So, very simply put, condition 1, you're a veteran.
Check.
And 2, are you willing to come on the show?
Yeah, and to build on that, come on the show means you have, because everything that we've done to this point has been in studio or on location when we were up in Virginia. So we don't have a virtual capability, at least not yet anyway. So
and there's something nice about doing it.
Well, I mean, in person is optimal, of course, but veteran, and they have to be able to, either travel or live here in town, which here in Fayetteville, the all-American city, we have a lot of veterans here. Very, very Army heavy, of course.
But there are other services.
But we have all the services here, which is pretty great.
Yeah. So really, that's about it. We don't really care what your specialty was. We don't care if you were enlisted or an officer or National Guard or active duty or reservist. I mean, we're even willing to have Space Force on, people. Space Force.
Consider this the clarion call for Space Force veterans.
Yeah.
Is that your unicorn, Dan?
I want to know what they do from a person that actually did it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So this question, this is a new segment we're going to be doing in the intro every time. So please, if you have questions or comments, send them. We have a contact us form that you can fill on the website, or you can hit us up on any of the 36 social media platforms we have. Yeah, or that's how it feels anyway. So we will bring it onto the show. Please keep it tasteful. Otherwise, everything's fair game. Yep. Critiques are welcome as well.
Yeah.
So
now, some of the questions, obviously, we are going to save for a special episode.
Yes.
When we do a Q&A episode after, I don't know, episode 25 or something.
Yeah, we'll come up with something. Yeah.
But most of the questions, bring it on.
Yeah.
Well, about anything. It doesn't have to necessarily be about the show. It can be about our thoughts on the Boxer Rebellion.
The Chinese still hate us because of that. Okay.
Spoilers.
Yes, spoilers. So, without further ado, we'd like to introduce Army veteran Mr. Lucas Velmer. Stay tuned.
Enjoy.
Lucas, welcome to Tracer Burnout.
Thanks.
It is nice to have another Army veteran on the show.
Well, I mean, you're not exactly in the minority. I mean, we've had quite a few Army veterans, but I mean that's not through design. But
I mean, proximity matters.
It's true. But anyway, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah. So we generally get started with, does your family have a history of service?
No, not really. My grandpa served like 3 years in Korea, and that was really it. I saw his service uniform when I was younger, and that was really it. So there was no real call to service, so to speak, when it comes to that.
What branch was he in?
He was in the Army.
Okay.
He was a mechanic. He never actually went to Korea. He actually ended up in Germany as a mechanic and got injured while he was there. And, he was on disability with the VA pretty much his entire life after that. So doing other jobs. I don't even know what he did because he was already retired by the time I was old enough to remember.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you know the nature of his injuries?
Besides his back, no. I have
Okay.
no idea.
Yeah.
It's not an uncommon injury.
Nope, not in our line
I think
of work.
probably all three of us at this table are working through some back stuff.
Yes.
Yep, definitely.
So, yeah, go ahead.
So where are you from originally?
I'm originally from Michigan, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
A Youper, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, a Youper.
Oh yeah, there a. Yep, it's there. But I don't go back. Family's pretty large up there, and I don't really have a whole lot of ties, when it comes to the family thing. Both my mom and my dad passed away, and my brother's up there. He's working, but that's really it. My sister, she's down in the Lower Peninsula, so there's nothing tying me and making me go back there.
Right. Michigan, or generally the upper Midwest, there's not a large amount of military installations.
No.
So what was it that led you to the Army?
If I'm being honest, let's say Top Gun would be a driving factor in what led me to pursuing military career. I say that jokingly only because obviously I didn't end up being a pilot, nor was I in the Navy. So
Well, that movie drove recruitment for Navy pilots and the Navy in general for at least a decade.
At least a decade.
I mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
even today, with Top Gun 2 or whatever they're calling it,
Yeah.
the second one,
Maverick, Dan.
that blew up recruitment again for the Navy. So,
which is fantastic. So, I mean, really what did it for me, though, was not having a whole lot of options out of school. Small school. My graduating class was, I think, the second largest ever in the history. And it was 118 people, right? So we're talking about really small. There's not much there to do. And if you're not in one of the richer families, there's really not much for you. So it was a matter of survival and what am I going to do with my life after I'm done with high school.
yeah.
So college wasn't really an option because couldn't afford it. So, all right, cool. Let's look at the military and what we're going to do. And it was the Army got to me first, really. Otherwise, I could have very easily ended up in the Navy or the Air Force.
What year is this? Or rather, what year did you enlist?
God. 99 is when I signed the paperwork and entered into delayed entry. So basically I had to finish my senior year of high school in 2000, and then within a month I was out and headed off to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Fort Lost in the Woods.
Yep.
So he joined the Army, Dan, because the beach volleyball scene in Top Gun, he was never going to get a tan like that in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So it's...
Nope.
I mean, you're a realist, and we appreciate that.
Yeah.
So.
No, I appreciate you calling out the pastely, ghostly white skin of all the people who live up there.
Everybody with that movie references the beach volleyball scene.
It's-
It's never about the flying. It's never about what's her name? Kelly McDonald? Was that
Kelly McGillis.
Or
Yes, Kelly
I'm
McGillis,
sorry.
yeah.
Yeah, nobody ever talks about that. It's always the volleyball. But anyway, all right. So you're
For all the wrong reasons.
so from seeking a tan outside of the Upper Peninsula to the middle of nowhere, Fort Leonard Wood,
Which is
Missouri.
Yep, Missouri. So I did my maps down in Milwaukee. I can count on my left hand or right, whichever one you like, to talk about big cities and the number that I've been to up to that point. So going to Milwaukee, first of all, was a culture shock. But then going to basic training and being in just this like amalgamation of all these different people, this culture melting pot, so to speak. It was an absolute culture shock. And so I kind of just regressed, and I did everything that I had to do, and I didn't want to make a name for myself at all. So much so that neither of my drill sergeants knew my name, and they mistook me for another person during graduation.
Amen. I did the exact same thing.
You were the gray man. That's
Yeah.
you pulled it off.
The
Congrats.
ghost in the platoon.
Yep.
So how did you? So let's half step backwards. What MOS were you, and why did you pick it?
Oh, God. So I was a heavy equipment operator by trade. At the time, it was 62 Echo, I think. And my stepdad really was the one who pushed me towards it, because when I signed up, initially I wanted to follow the flight path. So I was going to walk and do all of that to be a helicopter pilot.
Warrant officer candidate school.
Right. And he's like, well, that's really stupid. You know, what kind of career are you going to have with that if you get out and you don't like it? What are you going to do? How many helicopter pilots do you really know? You know, and talked me out of it. And me not knowing anything, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, sure. I guess that makes sense. Let me get a trade skill and something I can do on the outside in case I don't like it. So yeah, that's what led me into being an engineer for my first 10 years in the Army.
So it wasn't a needs of the Army thing per se. I mean, you had some say over that. Well, that's good.
You actually sought out a specific career field.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So you end up at Fort Lost in the Woods, Leonard Wood, Missouri, or Missouri, depending on what part of the country you're in.
In the mid to late summer.
Yeah.
It's pleasant there that time of year.
It was wonderful. It was really hot and really humid. Doing PT all day long in wood chips really was the highlight of
With the
my
bugs.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then when we went out for our FTX, there was a cold front that came through, and it was 40 degrees and raining the morning of our road march. So it was really fun. I had a great time while I was there.
Yeah, that area of the Midwest, when it's hot, and when it's cold, it's cold.
Before you went to Fort Leonard Wood, did you know what chiggers were?
I didn't. And you know what? I actually didn't end up with any chiggers. And, I didn't know what they were until I got to Fort Campbell.
Vile.
That's foreshadowing.
Yeah.
That's foreshadowing.
Right?
Okay, so you're the gray man in your platoon at basic training, so mazel tov to you for that. You make it through AIT, and you do all that there on station. So.
Yeah, so it wasn't one station unit training. As equipment operators, we did separate. So we had to take the march down the hill from one side of the post to the other. Another 9 weeks of AIT with drill sergeants and everything else. And one really crazy drill sergeant and one really crazy first sergeant, who I wouldn't meet the drill sergeant later on in life, but I would meet that first sergeant again. Had this crazy, weird third upper lip type thing, and when he yelled, you knew exactly who he was yelling at and what you were getting yelled at for. So everybody tried to avoid him like the plague, of course. So
for your AIT portion, as a heavy equipment operator, first, was your AIT specifically devoted solely to heavy equipment operators?
It was. So at the time, the MOS was split, where you had heavy equipment, which was like your bulldozers and bucket loaders and scrapers, graders, bigger stuff. And then it was the other side of that was light equipment, which was a 62 Juliet. Back in the day, of course, sea trucks and, smaller equipment, stuff like that. So, all 9 weeks is basically a week per piece of equipment, and you learn just enough to be absolutely dangerous.
But you're getting your license for all these as you're going through.
Yeah, but not civilian license,
Okay.
right? So you're basically just getting qualified on the piece of equipment. So that way, when you get to your first duty station, they can put it on your 348, right? Your driving record.
Your record.
And,
Yep.
and
Okay.
go
Now,
from
the
there.
time you came in, you actually were getting an actual printed
Yeah.
license.
Oh yeah.
Did they give you a new license every time you got certified on a vehicle, or did
Oh,
they
yeah.
just give you the license at the end of your training with all of the vehicles on there?
So they didn't give us a license out of school. It was once you get to your first duty station, they give you a license with, those pieces of equipment on. And then they're like, oh, well, hey, we have this, this, and this. So we're going to go ahead and add these. Or you're going to have to go through training. And we're going to then add it after the fact.
Yep. And back in those days, laminate was hard to come by, so it was a folded up piece of paper that you kept in your pocket
It would get damp
that would always get damp from the sweat, or you would wash it by accident, and then you get yelled at by every single leadership position in your platoon because you washed it for the third time that month.
Yeah.
There sounds like there's some scar tissue there. I may or may not have used clear tape to tape my license.
Yeah, that's the good.
The clear
It's
packaging
It's
tape.
packing tape.
Yeah.
Is what it
That's
is.
yep.
Yeah.
That's it. So
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a particular? It sounds like you've already answered this question, but do you have a particular drill sergeant that really stands out in your memory? Maybe a favorite, maybe not so much.
I remember both of my drill sergeants very well. The main one, was a heavy equipment operator. So never actually ended up running into him again later on. But we did stay in contact for a little while afterwards. But he ended up retiring and moving on, which is fine. But the other one I ended up running into in Iraq in 2006, I believe. We were on the same fob. And, when you see a name that's common, or not common, sorry, you kind of look and go, oh my God, that I remember that guy. And, now that you're in the Army, it's a lot different than being in that trainee mindset.
Yeah.
So, it was a great conversation, just, quick, like 5-10 minute conversation about where I was and, what I was doing and what he had done. And, that was that. Never saw him again. There was, however, another drill sergeant in another platoon that I remember very well that I ended up running into many years later in my career, and it may actually be somebody that you know. So when you run into a drill sergeant that you haven't seen in probably 14 years, and then you see them as an officer,
Oh, nice.
on a jump, you kind of go, oh, and it just brings back all those, memories and things like that. So, yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yep.
So you graduate AIT,
Mm-hmm.
and then what?
And then we get snowed into Fort Leonard Wood.
which happens more often than some might think.
God, yeah. So trying to get back home on a Greyhound bus took forever because I was going to hometown recruiting. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember if I had my first duty station already or there was a delay because of everything. And, we're talking about times where the computers were rare. Mm-hmm. Everything was done by paper. And so I think it was like the day I was leaving to go home. and I was after almost everybody else because I was, Christmas Exodus plus hometown recruiting and, all that stuff, plus trying to wait for a Greyhound bus that was actually going to run during a snowstorm. So, yeah, it took a little while for me to get out of there.
So if we can get into time and place here.
Yep.
What is the month and year?
So we're talking about December of 2000.
Late 2000 is kind of what I was
Yeah.
thinking. Okay, good. So
Okay.
you make it to hometown after all the snow drama, and how long do you do that duty?
Well, hometown recruiting was 2 weeks. And the recruiter I was working with was like, hey, just, go to the school like once or twice in this 2 weeks and check in, make sure you're alive, and, get ready to go to your next duty station because it's going to be a blast.
Yeah. Okay, so you're the first person that we've talked to about hometown recruiting. So can you kind of run through like what the intent is and what you were supposed to be doing?
The intent, obviously, it's in the name, right? So it's hometown recruiting. You're supposed to like go back to your school and meet up with all the people that you went to school with and teachers and talk about your great time during basic training in AIT and how great the Army is. Which I did, but I didn't actively get into it every single day because there just really wasn't that much interest. Out of my class, there were 3 people who joined the Army, right? 3 out of 118. I would say the year prior to that, there was probably about the same. Right, so the number of people that are truly interested in that, me talking to them really wasn't making much of a difference at all.
So at this point, do you already know what your first assignment is going to be, and you're just kind of, passing through? Okay, so
Yeah.
Did you have any sway whatsoever over your first duty assignment?
no.
Not at all.
No,
Okay, so
I had no idea. It was like literally the lottery.
okay, so tell us about it.
So, I mean, we're just sitting in the day room, all right, and waiting. I'm waiting longer than most other people are. People with airborne knew where they were going. I was like, I'm not interested in going into another school, nor am I interested in jumping out airplanes at this point in my life. And a lot of other people with different different things in their contract or whatever they knew where they were going, so they got their orders quickly because it was all predetermined. With me, I didn't have that in my contract, so I'm waiting for whatever, and whomever.
Leads in the Army, right?
Yeah, exactly, and that's what it ended up being. So, yeah, I mean, I was sitting there in the day room. They finally, brought the rest of us. There's probably a handful, maybe 10, 15 of us left, and they brought us our orders, and I was like, oh, okay, cool, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Great. So,
did they bring out the big keto ball spinner?
Right, just draw. Here you go. This is your assignment. No, it wasn't really dramatic at all.
Okay.
Did you have any expectations going into your first assignment?
No, I had no idea. Like, I went in completely blind into where I was going, what I was doing. It was like, go to this address. All right, cool. I'm just going to do what I'm told and be in whatever uniform it told me to be in. And that's what I did. I just left, right, left everywhere I went. And yeah, I made it to my unit.
So where'd you go?
326 Engineer Battalion. Sorry, numbers. Yeah, so I ended up in 326 Engineer Battalion, and we were right off of the parade field on Fort Campbell. So our motor pool was right down the street. Dining facility was attached. We were right next door to the field artillery unit. So, and then across our little PT field was the rest of the field artillery units. So, everything was relatively close by. So I didn't have to try to venture out to find a dining facility. Nothing like that. Everything was all pretty much in-house.
This is, I mean, you say it's Campbell. Is this part of the 101st, or is this like a sustainment command, or?
No, were at that time a division asset.
Okay.
And then every company was assigned to each one of the brigades.
Gotcha.
So
what did you end up doing?
We so when you talk about engineers, right, you either go into, okay, they do defensive stuff, right, or they're doing road construction or building things, right? Those are basically
building stuff or destroying stuff.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So what did we do? Well, we did defensive positions mostly for field artillery, aviation, and infantry.
Okay.
So our field exercises were separate from theirs, but at the same time as each one. So what they would have to do is, task out right through the division. Hey, we want heavy equipment to come out and dig in, XYZ, whatever it happens to be. And so we would then plan our field exercises kind of not in conjunction with them, but around when they would be out there. And we would try to get everything done within 72 hours. Yep. So
if there was an artillery or an infantry unit or whatever, and their training exercise was set for, this day to this day, then your unit would go out there 72, 96 hours prior and set up those positions as part of your training exercise, and then they would come in and backfill and conduct their training exercise. Something like that?
We would actually be out there around the same time that they would get out there. So they would be pulling in at the same time, so that way they could direct us where they actually wanted stuff. Okay. So
makes sense.
Their unit engineer officer should have already had this all planned out and everything, and I didn't learn about any of this stuff until way later in my career, right?
Should is a special word.
Yes.
The McCoo.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. We would go out there, we'd show up, and we had an idea of what we were going to do, but in terms of actually where are we going to put trenches, where are we going to put fighting positions, it was 100% dependent on where a field artillery unit was going to set up their guns and in what array, because if you dig a trench and then you try to put a howitzer over that trench to get it actually into its position, that's not going to work.
It doesn't.
Right?
That doesn't work, Dan.
No. Okay. So you said that you did defensive positions for aviation as well?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
That looks like putting the Q-36 radar thing on a berm. Okay. That looks like digging in fueling positions, like wherever they're going to put the fuel tankers or whatever, you're going to actually dig out into the ground, so that way they're below ground. When it comes to actual birds, you're not doing anything with them.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Right. So.
Okay. All right. I mean, everybody can pretty much easily envision what an infantry defensive position would look like, or an artillery defensive position would look like, but an aviation defensive position, not so easy to envision.
I mean, personally, I think infantry should dig their own fighting positions with their hands if necessary. But
I have done many a fighting position with an E-tool before.
Oh, E-tool, that's a cheat code.
Yes. Time consuming. Have you ever dug a 60 pit with a...
Honestly?
Yeah.
Yep, so we got tons of great lickies and chewies while we were out in the field because we're out there saving the day.
You're making people's day, yeah.
Yep, so it would take, in red clay, pretty much the entire field exercise for infantry to dig in with an E-tool, a fighting position, and do all their improvements. It took me 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. They were more than happy to hand off anything they had.
God bless hydraulics, right?
No.
Yep, for sure. So
okay, so that was this is now early 2001 when you show up at 2001,
and that's pretty much continued on until basically the end of 2002.
Okay. So what was the reaction within the unit to 9/11?
Boy. I would love to answer that question. However, I wasn't there. I was in air assault school. So the reaction there was interesting. And I remember that day very clearly. At least the morning.
Go ahead and run through it.
So basically, we had done PT that morning at the air assault school. Cadre released us. We had to be back, I think, at like 9:15. We'd run. I think it was a run that day, so we ran longer. And so I went back to the barracks because it was only about 2 miles down the road. And I went, did my shower, threw my stuff on, went to the dining facility, and there was stuff on the TV playing. It was probably 8:45, 8:50 when I was in there. And I'm not really worried about what's on the TV. I'm more worried about stuffing my face because I have to get back and be in formation by 9:15. And so I'm looking at the TV, and there's like this news program, and there's, this building that's got smoke coming out of it. And I'm just like, okay, I have no idea. I've never seen this movie. I don't know what's happening right now. And other people are just sitting there watching, intently.
Gobsmacked.
Yeah. Right? But it doesn't look anything out of the ordinary to me because there's always people in the dining facility watching the TV.
Yeah.
Right? So this is all normal for me. Drive back to the school. Nobody's talking about it, and I don't know if anybody knew. We get in formation and everything else, and then they bring us over we were doing rappelling. They bring us over to the rappel tower, and they stop. And they say, "Okay, we need to let you all know something." And all the cadre are there, right? The entire staff is all out there with us, and they say at roughly 8:45, a plane flew into one of the twin towers. We don't really have any more details. As soon as we hear anything, we'll let you know. If anybody has any family in that area, step aside, and we can talk more about it afterwards. Let's take a minute and do a minute of silence, and we'll honor those who've lost their lives. And that's what we did. We took that minute, and it seemed like it went on forever. I mean, it's a long time when you're silent. Mm-hmm. They're like, okay, so we're going to continue on. All right, grab your ropes, grab your Swiss seats. Let's go. And we just went on business as usual.
The army goes rolling along.
Yeah.
Were there anybody in your, or was there anyone in your class that did step aside because they had family?
I have no idea. I was too in shock because, in my mind, I had this idea of like, okay, so what's going to happen now, right? Because somebody just attacked us. We don't know who. So are we going to war? Are we not going to war? I'm in this school. I got to finish this. There's so many things, mm-hmm. so many unknowns about the future mm-hmm. that I really wasn't present in the moment,
I'm sorry, you said the plane crash. Did you know about the second?
No.
Plane? So, okay, so I didn't want to get ahead of ourselves here. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
No, yeah. So learned about the second plane crash later on.
Which changed everything.
Yeah. Right. So, and then the Pentagon, obviously, after that, and then the crash in the field, all of that stuff came after the fact. But, I had no idea. So we did that. That was September 12th was the second to last day. I think we had, I think we did our rappel tests and, stuff like that on the 12th. And then the 13th was graduation. So we did our road march that morning. That significantly changed. We had at Fort Campbell, you would go from the school and you would go all the way out and you'd go 6 miles out and it would take you out of one of the gates. and then you'd come 6 miles back. Well, the gates were closed.
Yeah.
Right? So now we had to do 3 miles out, 3 miles back, 3 miles out, 3 miles back. And
woof.
there is a giant hill in the middle of that route.
Ooh.
Where you're going down and then you're going back up. And so it definitely made for a very rough 12-mile road march. Yeah, and I think on after graduation or during graduation, we had, if I remember correctly, we had 2 Kiowas that were hovering over the field. Not, graduation was over by the actual the building itself where you do most of the training. There's a field that separates the building itself from where the road is and where all the ranges are. So like base security changed instantly, like overnight. When I got back to the unit, they had guard rosters. People were guarding like intersections at different parts of the street and everything else. I don't even know how long that lasted. Honestly, it's all like a blur to me after that.
Wow. Okay. So that continued for quite some time, and then of course you still have your actual training and your actual missions and responsibilities that you're going through at your unit, as well as now these additional taskings.
Right.
So yeah, things can get pretty harried. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thankful I lived in the barracks at the time, because trying to get on and off base was absolutely horrendous for a very long time. So I don't even remember, because I know I moved out of the barracks in, I want to say 2002 at some point. Maybe in the spring or summer, and by that time, all the road guard duties and guarding intersections and stuff like that had all basically waned, and we were kind of back to normal stuff because the gates were operating and they had guards on the gates.
That would have been the biggest lasting immediate difference. Is now there's gate security with guards and stuff, whereas before it was just an open post.
Campbell wasn't, so you had to have a sticker, and you had MPs at the gates waving you in. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, it might as well have been an open post.
Yeah.
Here at Bragg was an open post, if you can imagine.
Yeah. I mean,
Bragg Boulevard went right through the middle.
Yeah.
Most military installations still had the stickers at that time, but the actual checking IDs and gate guards that were at the time MPs and supplements, and then eventually the contracted out, civilian guards.
Right.
That's probably one of the most lasting effects.
Yeah, for sure.
20 plus years later. Yeah.
So 9/11 is freshly in the rearview mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Iraq is coming. You don't know that's coming yet, though. So tell us about the period of time in between.
There was a lot of unknowns in terms of who was going to go to Afghanistan. So eventually the all too famous Rakkasans were called to go, and obviously the engineer company that was assigned to that brigade was also going to Afghanistan. But they were talking about, okay, well, we'll take, we may need a few extra equipment operators because we're going to have to do runway repair and, runway seizures and, stuff like that. And I was like, okay, maybe I'll go, maybe I won't go. But, eventually they ended up taking, I think, 2 people from our platoon. And the rest of us continued on business as usual until, I don't know. I want to say maybe December of 2002 is when we were like ramping up to go to Iraq, and
Afghanistan.
No, so Iraq.
So you're okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep. So that one company, had done its mission, and I believe they were already replaced in Afghanistan by this time. So the rest of us ended up going, and I think they followed on after the fact, or maybe they came back and then they, a little bit early and came. But regardless, the entire battalion deployed to Iraq. We went to Kuwait first, and we stayed in Kuwait for, God, I don't know, 3 weeks, something like that. Yeah. There's all these little fobs all over the place in the desert of Kuwait, all aptly named with states, of which only one remains, and it's not it's not even named the original name anymore. So
the invasion for Iraq doesn't happen for another few more months. So what are they telling y'all in the late 2002? I mean, what are they telling you you're going to go do?
To deploy to Kuwait and eventually go into Iraq.
Okay.
So they told you beforehand, like, that we're going into Iraq.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So we knew that was the ultimate goal. That wasn't about going to Kuwait for any deterrence or anything like that. They're like, nope, we're going there. And so be prepared. Take your gas mask. Take your take all your mop gear and everything else.
What was your reaction to that? Do you remember?
I honestly don't remember. It was everything was very much task oriented for me, and so it was like, okay, everybody's going. All right, I'm going too.
Even when they said you're going to the desert, pack your mop suit.
Yeah, because to me it was still just like, all right, this is the Army, this is what you do, right? And it everything just kind of moving right along, right? It's just like, okay, here's your 25-meter target. Here's your next 25-meter target. It was just, that was very much the way I approached how I looked at things in my career, especially initially, because it was very easy to just do tasks and make it happen.
Yeah.
Just go from one goal to the next.
Yep.
You're a specialist at this point?
Yeah.
E4 specialist?
Yep.
Okay. Yep.
Yep. I'd already been through PLDC at that time, which changed to WLC.
Yes, the primary leadership development course, to the warrior leaders course, to the basic leaders course.
I don't know. Stand by for the next name.
Yeah, it might be something different. But
Yep.
Okay. So, Kuwait, as I like to call it, purgatory.
Yeah. That's a good description for it. So Kuwait is hot, but there's a task to be done, and that's called unloading ships. And so I get to be the E4 in charge of unloading all of our battalion's equipment.
The E4 Mafia.
Yeah. So there's a group of us, basically, that are supposed to take our equipment off the ship and put it into a prepo position specific for our unit. When I get there, that's not how that goes. They're like, get this stuff off the ship and put it wherever, we don't care. Okay, great.
Sounds about right.
So then in the middle of the night, we're trying to move stuff around, right? And move all this other equipment so we can get our stuff in where it's supposed to go, where they want it to go. I mean, that was my life for, I don't know, probably 2 weeks out of the time we were in Kuwait. So it wasn't terrible. I was in Kuwait City, hanging out on the beach, getting those Scud missile sirens every so often, and running to the bunker. I think I was probably back in the desert itself for maybe a week before we actually hopped in our vehicles and went across the border.
Across the berm.
Yeah.
You crossing Buka?
I have no idea. All I remember is it was really hot, and I was driving a tractor trailer with a bulldozer on the back. And we drove for like 2 days. I think we ended up outside of the city of Anajif. Mm-hmm. But we only went into the city once, and it was after it was already cleared. So the division main, that was our main area of responsibility. Yep. And so we just, everywhere we did, we dug them in, And we hung out and wait for the next move, the next word, where are we going next type of thing. We jumped from there to, Iskandariya, south of Baghdad.
Yep.
We stayed there for several weeks because we ended up having to go and remove all the abandoned Iraqi BMPs that they left fully loaded.
Just on the sides of the road or in the middle of the road in some cases. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we would load them up, oftentimes just pushing them up with a bulldozer onto the trailers and then taking them to whatever depot yard that had been designated for those pieces of equipment. A lot of the roads that we ended up revisiting in 2006 and 2009 on subsequent deployments, I remember driving down those and they were completely clear and there's, people everywhere.
Well, yeah, 2003.
Yeah. And 2006 and 2009, there's holes that have been repaired everywhere down some of these roads that I had been on.
So to explain to our listeners, that's in 2003, once the main threat, which was the conventional armor columns, Saddam, once that was eliminated, there was no insurgency that early on. So there's no IED threat.
Right.
None of that exists. So the threat is gone. I mean, it's the safest place on earth.
Yeah. Essentially. And it was, and it continued to be that way until we went up to Mosul. And that's pretty much where we ended up for the last 6 months of that deployment.
Yeah. I imagine everybody, the Marines and the Army are going to be like this, but very much hurry up and wait, right? Just as a culture. I imagine in your type of engineering unit, that is a whole new level, because what do you do in those lulls when you're not digging fighting positions, getting position improvement, doing all that? When you're not doing that, I imagine it's a lot of playing cards and smoking cigarettes. But then when it's time to go, it is time to go.
Yep.
Is that fair?
That is 100% accurate. You're doing motor pool maintenance. You're dry sweeping the motor pool. I can't even tell you how much time I've spent in a motor pool just looking at equipment, hoping something happens, it breaks, so I can...
These hands, give me something to do.
Because you have to be there, right? Yeah. So they say, okay, well, we're going to be in the motor pool from 09 until 1600. All right, great. What are we doing? We're in the motor pool. Okay, what are we doing? Oh, we're all right. Figure out something. Great.
Hip sergeant's time training. Yeah.
Hip pocket training. Sergeant's time training. Right. Yeah. So there was definitely no action going on when there's nothing happening. But yeah, when it's time to go, it's time to go.
Yeah. I could see that.
So your first tour in Iraq lasts how long?
A year. After we were told it was going to be 3 months, and then 6 months. And then 8 months. And
home by Christmas.
Right. So, yeah, it ended up being 2 weeks shy of a full year. So, yeah.
Does that include your 3 weeks in Kuwait?
It does include my 3 weeks in Kuwait, yes.
Yep.
Okay. So then back to Campbell.
Boy, it's 2004. I'm getting the itch to leave, but not really knowing what's going to happen, because while I was in Iraq, I re-enlisted. I re-enlisted to change my job because I loved the Army and I loved what I was doing. And I was like, you know what? I want to be closer to the fight. I want to be a Calf Scout. But there were no school dates. So I was like, all right, fine. I'll just re-enlist. I got a $5,000 bonus. And I re-enlisted for another 3 years. It was great. Perfect. So got back to Campbell, trying to figure out, what's going on. They're breaking apart the engineer battalion. And they are putting each one of the companies actually assigned to each one of the brigades. And so with us being in HHC...
This is the creation of the brigade combat team?
They called it modularity, and it was the creation of the BCT, the Brigade Combat Team.
Yep. that was the very beginning of it. So they were getting ready to stand up the 4th Brigade at Fort Campbell at that time. They took HHC and they basically just piecemealed us out to each one of the companies because the battalion was going to get disbanded anyways. So, okay. So I ended up going to Bravo Company, which was assigned to the 502nd. And then I ended up getting orders to Alaska in the end of 2004. It was right around Christmas of 2004. I got an email at that time, early, right? AKO was just coming online. I got the notification, I checked my email, and there it is. You've been placed on assignment to Fort Richardson, Alaska. And I was like, great. So I went and got with my first sergeant. I was like, hey, I know they're standing up an airborne unit. I want to go to jump school. He's like, okay, I know the branch manager. Let's see if we can make that happen. So, yep, he gets me an airborne school slot, but I have to wait until after I get up there, right? And I don't know at this time. I'm still like an E4 promotable. I don't know all the ins and outs about funding and stuff like that. So I get up there, and my battalion CSM, I got up there in May of 2005, I believe, and I was supposed to go to jump school in like June. And he's like, check it out. I don't know how you got this slot, but I don't know if I can send you because we don't have the funding for it. And I was like, oh, okay, but I mean, I have this school, so if I don't show up, right, then it's going to be a stain on my record. So I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Apparently in the background, he called my first sergeant, got the idea from him and on what happened and how this whole thing transpired. And so here I am prepping to go to jump school, and the CSM pulls me in his office. He's like, look, you're not going. I called your first sergeant. He said, you're great, and if I send you, I'm going to lose you to the new unit standing up, and you're too much of an asset to let go, he said. Okay, great. So I'm thwarted from going to jump school at that time, and I'm now in Alaska in a heavy engineer unit doing road construction type stuff.
So did you take it as a compliment that you were an asset that they wouldn't let go? Or were you pretty mad that they were screwing with your career plans?
I was pretty salty.
It's a cold comfort.
Yeah. Pretty salty for sure. So, I mean, things continue on. I'm in this new unit. I don't even know how to describe the units in Alaska in comparison to being at Fort Campbell. I would venture to guess it's like being in the 82nd and going to, I don't know, maybe Fort Riley, right, as an infantry person. Or just the mindset and how people were, and the lack of care, the lack of hurry up in anybody's step was just absolutely mind-boggling to me. It was very easy to just kind of outshine people because I had to try so hard while I was at Campbell to keep up with all these other people who were super high speed and did all these things and taught me so much. And then I'm up here in this unit, and everybody's like, I mean, no, we're not going to run. Like, no, there's time. I don't need to do that. What do you mean you don't need to do that? So, yeah, there was a huge culture shock for me that I never really adjusted to up there.
But how hard was it to adjust to the climate?
Or the lack of daylight. Or surplus of daylight.
It's not quite as bad at Fort Richardson in comparison to Fort Wainwright, which is way up in the middle. The severity isn't quite as bad. However, the weather's still bad. It still gets really cold. I grew up in the UP, so the weather is similar, not quite as humid.
But you've spent the last several years in Fort Leonard Wood and then Fort Campbell,
Right.
where it is not like that at all. So,
Yeah.
I mean, was it hard to readjust, I guess, to the cold?
Yeah, well, I'm never a fan of the cold anyways. So this just reconfirmed my hatred for the cold. The lack of daylight is absolutely depressing in the wintertime. You go to work and it's dark, and you leave work and it's dark, and you may or may not, if you weren't outside, you may or may not have seen the sun come up. It did. If it was sunny out, you would see it. If the microphone's the mountain, you'd see the sun basically come up and barely crest over the top of the mountain before it'd come back down. You get about 4 hours of daylight.
Had they started using the daylight lamps yet? Because obviously there's the mental impact of not getting enough daylight.
Seasonal,
Right.
I forget the acronym.
Yeah,
It's a seasonal something disorder.
Yeah, I don't know when they started using the daylight lamps so that you could at least feel like you were being exposed to daylight, and it's supposed to minimize depression and things like that. So
not initially. I think they started coming out with those daylight bulbs maybe while I was up there, but it had been a while after I was up there. Of course, I was up there stationed for 5 years, but I really only spent about 3 years because the other 2 were spent in Iraq. So, yeah.
How long were you there before you then turned around and went right back to Iraq?
Let's see. I got there in May of 2005. So, and we left, I want to say it was either November or December of 2005. So it was only about 6 months that I had been up there.
Was there any trepidation in deploying with the unit, given the culture differences between the 101st and being up there?
No, because I had the experience, and many of the people that were up there did not. And so being able to go over, and a lot of people just kind of leaned on me to give at least some degree of experience. The units and the mission were 100% different. Like, it just not even the same in the same hemisphere in terms of what the missions would entail being over there. So I think that difference in what our mission was and what we're designed to do, I had plenty of confidence that we were going over. We would be on an operating base pretty much the entire time. If we did leave the wire, it's only going to be for short periods of time, whatever the case is. And so I wasn't really worried about it at all.
So you got stripes at this point?
I did. I got promoted to E5
shortly before, right?
Yeah, I want to say it was in the summer, sometime in the summer.
Okay.
I'd finally got enough points, and the points dropped enough to to pick me up.
Amen to that. So a couple questions. So how we determined how long from the time you got to Alaska deployed. How long from the time you got home from your first deployment to the time you left for your second?
Well, probably, let's see, I got back in January of 2004.
It's about a year, right? I mean,
yeah, and I was out the door in December of 2005, so almost 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't carry the one. Okay.
Yeah.
So even in that case, in your Alaska unit, you're probably one of the only people that have deployed at that point.
Right.
We're still relatively early enough where, unless you've been in a light unit, a lot of the light infantry units, I'm looking at Dan over here, like 10th Mountain or the 82nd, some of those guys have been cycling through Afghanistan. But if you're in a heavy unit and it's 2004 or 5, you may not have deployed yet.
Right.
So you're the old man in the unit already.
Yeah.
Okay. What about the officers? Same.
All junior.
Okay.
Yep. Very little experience because most of the officers that come there are lieutenants trying to get their PL time, and the company commander has maybe a few years of experience, may or may not have deployed. I don't think he deployed. I'm trying to think who was the commander at the time. I couldn't tell you. I honestly don't remember who the commander was that first trip with them.
But I mean, you're going back now, and it's your second tour, and the vast majority of the leaders within your platoon, and then of course, the rest of the company have no experience.
Right. Yep. So it's a matter of, all right, here's some of the things that we need to do. And so I was basically just filling in gaps for the leadership as we prepped to go. And then when we got over there, some of the things that we would need to do once we were on the ground.
Did you pass through Kuwait again? I think.
Oh yeah.
I think everybody did.
Yeah.
So was it a long holdover in Kuwait?
No, it really wasn't because, there's not all the prep, there's not all the equipment that we have to take. Like, a majority of the stuff is already there in country that's been left.
So you're really just doing like 10 days, maybe 2 weeks to climatize, and then...
Yep.
I think they make everybody re-zero your weapons and do all that stuff.
Yep.
Prospect.
Yep.
So, I'm sorry, one more time. What's the month and year? It's late 05?
Yeah, it's late 05.
Late 05.
Either November, December
so
05.
So by this point, the insurgency is in full swing.
Yes, which I'm not experienced with.
So take it away.
So we ended up being up in Cuaria West, which is south of Mosul. It's an airfield, giant airfield, that we had bombed initially and had repaired to some extent. I had been there the first rotation because we were the ones who built the initial berm around the perimeter, but it wasn't. It was the initial perimeter, so it was not very large.
It was never meant to be permanent.
No,
Yeah.
right. And it was probably only like maybe 5 feet tall, right? So, but there were still remnants when we pulled in to, when we got in there. I was like, oh, I remember this, right? And so there was a lot of like familiarity with where we were and what we were doing. It had exploded, in terms of the size and how much was going on at that base.
And in some cases, literally.
Oh, yeah, right. So we were there only maybe a month or two, and I was given the task of rebuilding or managing the project to rebuild the outer perimeter berm that basically ran along the exterior fence. This is 16 miles of dirt that has to be pushed up. The initial one was probably about 6 feet tall. They wanted it at least 8, maybe 10 feet if we could make it basically be higher than the fence that was there. So that was a 3-month project.
You looked at First Sergeant and said, that's going to be a lot of rippets in Copenhagen for that job.
Yep. And take a very, very, very long time. I think we had, at any given time, we had one D9 up-armored bulldozer, which is absolutely massive. It's bigger than an Abrams, heavier than an Abrams, just to give you an idea of the size. And we had maybe 4 or 5 D7 dozers, which are smaller, about the size you'd see on a road construction project, running all day long, over and over and over again, basically with no break, 7 days a week, over and over again, just pushing dirt. Right? So it gets very boring and very monotonous, especially when you're a project manager, because you're not on the piece of equipment operating. You're sitting there watching. Yes. Yes.
It's a lot of rippets, Dan. You're doing push-ups in between, just
yeah,
something. do something with my hands.
Yes.
You're basically making sure that nothing unsafe happens.
Yes. That is the entire purpose.
Did you ever encounter a safety issue during that process? Because I mean, when things get monotonous,
Yeah.
people tend to
That's
take shortcuts.
Complacency. Yeah.
I mean, of course, people like kind of daydreaming, falling asleep on the piece of equipment, especially if you're a good operator and you're really smooth with your cuts. Yeah, the tendency of the just hearing the constant noise.
It's the white noise. Yeah.
Yep. And just being out there in the hot sun and just like, yeah, it's very easy to fall asleep. So trying to make sure these guys stay hydrated, and get food and everything else to make sure everything maintains continuity, switching people out, having people in reserves to be able to swap people out on the equipment and stuff was absolutely paramount to making sure things ran smoothly. Major incidents, no. I think the worst thing we had was somebody left their helmet on the track of a piece of equipment. Somebody else got on it on the other side, and that person ended up having to pay $300 out of their pocket for a brand new helmet. So, yeah.
Did you have any issues with enemy threat, whether it be contact or even unexploded ordnance? It's Iraq, right? You just never really know. Did you have any issues unearthing?
Not out there at all. I would say the only issues we had were when we would have to pull detail, basically when our two vertical construction companies were tasked with going out and doing crater repair on the roads. So they were obviously good with concrete, so we'd have to come out with concrete and, rebar and stuff like that. So, we'd spend nights going out there and doing that kind of stuff. There was never any real direct contact with any of those, thankfully. I think because we were in such a desolate area that it wasn't worth it to try and, gang up on, there's 30 vehicles and about 80 dudes out there, all with weapons and everything else. Yeah, sure, they were pouring concrete, but there was, it was the very early stages of these IEDs too. So,
the risk reward wasn't there.
Yeah, it really wasn't. So,
where were you getting your concrete? There's a reason why I'm asking this question. Do you know?
We were getting our concrete. It was being made in-house. So we would, now as far as the actual bags of concrete themselves, I have no idea where they were getting procured from. I assume they were coming from the Class 4 yard because that's where we pretty much got everything that we needed.
Yeah, when I was in Iraq in 07-08, we were having unimaginable amounts of Jersey and Texas barriers being made, and it turned into a thing where we were getting the concrete from and what overseas companies were sending us, and we'll talk about that over a beer sometime. But it was a thing getting the volume of concrete that we needed in to the war zone during the worst part of the surge. It was a thing. So.
Yeah, no, I could absolutely see that.
Yeah. Okay.
So you build your 16-mile perimeter.
Yeah, I would say about 3/4 of the way through that is when we got the notification that we were going to be leaving Key West.
Change of mission.
Yep, because it's election time coming up. And so they need us down at or around the international airport. And there's plenty of missions to be done on all those little outskirt bases that are right there off of that main airfield thing.
Buy-up?
Buy-up. So, the rest of the company did plenty of other missions around the base on the Key West while we were there, just small things. And then the main one was obviously repairing all these craters in the main highway. opening up the MSRs. So,
Main supply route.
yep. So yeah, we moved on. We reluctantly left our little slice of heaven, if you want to call it that, and headed down to Biop. I don't remember the small little fob we were on that was a little bit of
Yeah, I mean,
away.
there's so many in that time period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was all within the main complex of Biop, but yeah, I don't remember what it was, but we were down there the rest of the time. It's obviously when all those units got their extension notifications is while we were there. So we were worried that we were going to end up getting the 15 to 18 month extension too. So yeah, election time was tumultuous for sure.
And you're talking about the local
Yeah.
Iraqi election.
Yeah, it was the first ones, right? So
Yep.
the intent was to block off all of the access routes to the main roads, right? All those little roads and all these things. They basically gave us lists of grid coordinates every night, and we would have to go and take and put barriers up on each one of those to block traffic.
Yep.
That was significant portion of our time was spent doing that. And I think the other really big, there were two other big projects that I took part in. One was expanding the DRMO yard for all the demilled equipment and stuff like that. That took a significant amount of time and resources to put together. And then there was a huge pad that had to be done and had to meet a certain grade level, right?
Yep.
So we got surveyors out there, and we've got
Getting all the specs.
Yep, and then having to tamp it all down and make sure it meets compaction purposes, because they're going to build, whatever they're going to build on top of it. So, but yeah,
The slump test.
yeah, yep, basically. Yeah, I think that is. There were a few missions out there that we did. We got attacked once or twice while we were out driving around to different locations. A lot of that stuff is a blur. After the first one, which we didn't talk about in 2003, when a group of us were in the middle, basically, of downtown Baghdad, because we got, I don't know, moved around into a different spot than the route we were supposed to take, and we ended up in this traffic circle, and we got attacked while we were in the traffic circle, right? That was a significant event, and that would really start the triggering events for me mentally going down the road. So yeah, compartmentalization and all that stuff, like, all right, take care of whatever I've got to take care of in the moment. That's what happened in this 2006 deployment, is just, take care of what we've got to take care of, and I'll deal with it after. But I never did.
Yeah.
Because it was done. It was in the past. So now I'm not going to think about it, and I'm not going to deal with it.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I definitely want to talk about that. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll explore that a little bit.
go.
Perfect.
All right. So you're back on your second tour,
Yep.
and you had some contact that triggers a response from your contact on your previous deployment.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that. The second one.
What I remember is an explosion on the vehicle in front of us, and that is about it. Honestly, I don't have any more details beyond that. I don't remember what happened or what happened after the fact. I don't really... I can picture the road. I can picture the vehicle. I can picture where I'm sitting and all that, but that's it. I couldn't tell you where we're at. I don't know where we went to after that, and on how we got out. So, yeah, That's about the level of detail I've got left in my brain.
What did you learn afterwards?
That the vehicle had been disabled, and that there were no injuries, no casualties. There was injuries, obviously, but no casualties. Everybody had exfilled back to our base there on BIOP, and that's it.
Was it an IED?
Yes. To what size, no idea. And I never went into detail and tried to figure it out after that.
Okay. With the disabled vehicle, that was the vehicle in front of you, or that was your vehicle?
That was the vehicle in front of us.
You don't remember because you blacked out, but later on down the road, did you learn what they did with the vehicle? Did they destroy it in place, or did they find a way to return it?
Good question. No idea.
Okay.
Because I think we left it there and we just got the people and the equipment and got out. But yeah, I don't remember anything beyond that.
Okay. How long is that period of time where you don't remember, where you blacked out or blocked it from your memory? How long is that period?
It's probably hard to pin down.
It is really hard to pin down because I don't remember where we were at, so I don't know how long it took to get back to the base. While we're talking, I'm trying to piece it back together.
Could it be described as hours, or a day, or 2 days?
Oh no, it was definitely within hours, probably.
Okay.
I would venture to guess it had to have been within 2 or 3 hours, because we never ventured very far in terms of distance. Like, we weren't making major movements for any of these things.
And this was the first IED incident for your unit?
Yes, I think so, but yeah, don't hold me to it, because
right.
I could absolutely be mistaken.
Did that change the way that your unit approached things going outside the base?
I don't think so. We still maintain the same TTPs, right? It's just a matter of, all right, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to react to contact, right, type of things. But it was still somewhat early, so there wasn't a whole lot of things that were established in terms of best practices and stuff.
Yeah, it's still fairly early on.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. And how after that incident, how much longer were you in country?
That was, gosh, I'm trying to remember. That had to have been fall time frame. I would say maybe somewhere between July and September, I would think. Actually, it had to be later than that. It was probably more like September, October time frame, because it was starting to get wet. So it had to be at the end, towards the end of summer and beginning of winter, when you start hitting the rainy season. To be honest, I totally forgot about this entire event all the way up until we started talking about it. So I am literally trying to recall these memories on the fly, because I haven't even thought about it. But something we talked about, something we said, triggered that memory.
That's the way memories tend to work.
Mm.
Yeah. Any more incidents from that second deployment?
Not that I can remember.
Okay.
I don't believe so. Yeah, no, I think that was it. That's crazy, because that deployment is some of it is a blur. I don't remember many pieces of it, except for some of those big highlights that I talked about.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like we said before, the monotony tends to make things sort of fade together.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you're doing the same monotonous task for long periods of time, then yeah, that's what you tend to remember.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So you get back to the States, or back to Alaska.
That's still a state. Yeah.
It still is.
For now.
And when is it? When is it that you get back?
So it was almost to the day a year. So it was either going to be November or December. I think it was December, because that next deployment was November. So that's why I run those two together. So yeah, I'm pretty sure it was December of 2006. And yeah, back in Alaska, we know that there's going to be people leaving, new people coming in.
Life cycle.
Yep. That wonderful Arforgen thing that we tried to implement.
Arforgen, that's right. I forgot about that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, right, we're trying to figure out, all right, when is the unit going to go again? We have a tentative timeline. The Army's changing at the same time, so nothing is really set in stone. They stand up an engineer battalion up there, like an engineer battalion proper, because prior to that, there were two engineer companies up there, ours and another one. And our parent battalion was down in Hawaii. And so we were assigned in Alaska to initially a CSSB, right, Combat Service Support Battalion, who ended up deploying, and then they put us underneath a provisional MP battalion. And so there's plenty of things that came with that provisional status that just kind of made things absolutely chaotic before that engineer battalion was stood up and took things over. So I say all that to kind of preface the conversation in that I was looking for something else. So I wanted to be a squad leader. I was already a senior E5. I had already gone to the board while I was in Iraq for that rotation. And I was already outperforming my peers, but none of them were leaving, so I wasn't going to get that E6 position yet. So I knew the other company that was across the street was, needing people. Well, I don't know, for whatever reason, it didn't work out. And maybe for the better. So our company commander offered me the position of being the operations NCO for the company.
It'll be good for your career.
It'll be good for your career. It's an E7 position. It's you're working outside your MOS, you're doing all these different things because it was listed at that time. They had already done the changeover for the engineers, so we were all 21 series at the time. So this is a 21 hotel, like construction position. You're going to be working an E7 position as an E5. This will be great for you. All while the provisional MP battalion is standing up and taking over so the CSSB can deploy. All that to say, they gave me full access to almost everything. So I was doing all of the administrative functions for the company. And by the way, nothing had been done prior to me getting in there in terms of like cleaning up and maintaining records and cleaning out records from people who had left and, prepping anything. So I'm doing all that, trying to clean house at the same time of learning all these new systems like DTMS and eMilpo. I had full eMilpo access as
that's significant.
That is really significant.
Yeah.
Because the MP battalion couldn't handle the volume of people to, support it. So I was doing all that. I was doing taskings. I was doing, basically all of the functions minus the training NCO, who I was in charge of, and the supply sergeant, who outranked me, and our commo person. And that was it. Everything else, all the rest of the admin functions were pretty much left up to me to handle day-to-day operations. And then maintenance, obviously, and budgeting was handled by the XO.
So nothing about operations is glorious or fun. But in hindsight, doing all that, do you think you're better off for it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It set me up for multiple things and multiple successes in subsequent positions.
Yeah, I mean, oftentimes you grit your teeth when people tell you, like, oh, it's for your own good. And you're like, yeah, thanks a lot, sir, ma'am. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But oftentimes they end up being right.
Job-wise, yes. Family-wise, no.
Okay, fair enough.
Because now that required me to be in early. At least 30 to 45 minutes before PT, and it required me to stay late. So, and I was dedicated to the job, and my family came second over and over again, right? So, that was absolutely one of those things that was a secondary effect, was just basically, all the rest of my life was not really, it was there, but that's it. Everything else revolved around doing my job.
So how long were you doing this as the ops NCO?
A year, I think. Let's see. We got back. I had to do some math. We got back in 2006. I think they hemmed and hawed about putting me into a position for a few months. I would say probably May to May would be a rough timeline. So May of 2006 to May of 2007 would maybe sound right. Trying to piece it all together because, because we left. Nope, that can't be right. Good question. I'll have to get back to you on that. Because what I can do though is I can take you through the timeline of what happened leading up to the next deployment, because that one I remember for sure was November of 2008 to November of 2009. And then back that up, I was given about 5 or 6 months, I think, to do a prep for that deployment. So we're talking April timeframe, I would say March, April timeframe, of when I would have come out of that ops position of 2008. So that means I would have been there for, a year. So 2007, getting back in January 2006. So yeah, that's about it.
Okay. So when you came out of that position, was that, I guess, how did that come about? Did somebody more senior come in and then take that position from you? Did you opt out of it and say, I got to get back to, doing what heavy equipment operators do? Or did another opportunity come along that you took?
Yes. I would say almost yes to all of the things that you said. So I had, gotten promoted while I was in that ops position. And we had a platoon sergeant from another platoon who had made E7, and had already done the requisite time in that position. And so she was looking for something else, but wasn't ready to PCS yet. So she moved into that position. At the same time, the company was directed by our parent battalion to stand up a security team. But we weren't given extra positions, and we had to do it all internal. And so they put me in charge of it because I had the most experience. I had combat experience. I had light infantry-ish experience, being with the 101st and being co-located with combat engineers and, all that stuff. So in terms of tactical, I don't know, prowess, I guess, ability, whatever you want to call it, I probably had the most out of anybody in the company. So they're the ones that this company commander and the first sergeant that said, yeah, this is something that you should do. And so I got the glorious task of trying to recruit people to be part of the security team, because where we were going in Iraq, we would be split between two provinces, with engineer projects across both of those provinces. So the commander and the first sergeant were going to be required to travel often enough that we needed a team. So I started off with, roughly 18 volunteers, or people that were
voluntold
volunteers
out of their platoons. And of course, like any other organization does, most of those people were the misfits from the platoons, right?
Yep.
So
I'm all too familiar with
right.
When
the ad hoc.
when leaders get an opportunity to discard the problem children or the dead weight, they will snatch it up.
Yeah.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, all I needed was 13 or 14 individuals. And so I ended up having to cut a few people. But I had to design a pre-deployment training plan, and do it all from scratch and based on, basically experience, because there were no handbooks or anything else for me to use for this. So I was like, okay, well, I know this is what we're going to be doing. Here's the weapon systems we need to be familiar with. And the number one thing for me was building a cohesive team. And so I spent a lot of time with them doing team building events. Some of them physical, and others I would take them once a week to the MWR, and we would system link all the Xboxes, rent it out, and we would play Call of Duty in teams and do that. And then we would talk about afterwards some of the tactics and stuff like that. So I was able to use it as a training opportunity to
Cool.
To do AARs and stuff. So it was a kind of a wild experience, and I was given pretty much a blank check to do whatever I could do to make this work.
Well, I already know what you do in the second half of your career, but I could see how this would prepare you for that. But let's not get ahead of ourselves.
Right. Yeah.
So you had about 5 months to get these guys ready for the security mission?
Yep.
When you left, were you confident that you were ready?
Yeah, absolutely. So once we got over there, we knew we would have a good rip. We had communicated with the people that were forward. We knew what vehicles we were going to fall in on. We knew what equipment we were falling in on. So it was a matter of, just kind of learning the ins and outs of the base and what was required to leave and doing joint missions and stuff like that. So
you get there in November of 2007, right?
November of 2008.
I got my years crisscrossed. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Oh, wait. So you would have gotten there just after I left. I left Iraq in June of 2008. So where I know y'all were very mobile. Where were you out of?
Tikrit.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
And then obviously 2 provinces. So the other stuff that was done was over in Kirkuk. And so we were making that trip pretty frequently. So I got really familiar with the 2 to 3 different routes that you could take to get there, and depending on your level of desire to face contact would dictate, which route you really wanted to take.
So a couple things. November 08, this is considered the end of the surge period. So I don't remember whatever it was, phase whatever after the surge. I don't even remember what post surge Iraq. So most of the threat at this point is still exclusively on the roads.
Yes.
Whether it be IED or EFP emplacements.
Yep.
So the threat is on the roads, which is where exclusively you are.
Correct.
Right. So just kind of shaping that for everybody else. We're not fighting in the streets, and we're not. It's not Fallujah, right? It's the threat is on the roads. So tell us how, based off of your experiences from your previous 2 deployments, now you're in the danger zone, right?
All the time.
You're on the X all the time, right?
Yeah. Every single mission is a prayer and a hope, right?
Yeah.
Line it up with route security or route clearance. If you've got overhead assets to be able to communicate with, do everything you can. And my job I was always at the back. I was always rear security. Whether I was convoy commander or not, like in title, didn't really matter because I was in charge of my guys. And so commander and the first sergeant would ride in 2 separate vehicles. We always switched up, where each one of those vehicles was, and, tried to practice different TTPs to make sure that we didn't present really soft targets. They gave me the latitude to run that team the way I wanted, and they trusted me fully to run those convoys the way I needed to. And we drove, we had probably, I'd have to go back and look at my evals because I know it's in there, but mileage wise, well over, I would say 14, 15,000 miles in that 12-month period. Thankfully, we didn't get attacked except for once, and we caught 2 others. And of course, waiting for EOD to come.
Waiting on EOD.
Take it.
A common refrain.
So, what kind of, these are 1151s?
No, we fell in on 1151s, and they were traded out within a month of us being there for the Cayman up armored.
Ooh. So the 1151s are the up armored Humvees.
Yep.
And then the Cayman
is basically it's an up armored LMTV. It was probably one of the better variants that was out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
big truck.
Of course, we had those boxes on the front with the glow plug in it for those heat sensitive IEDs.
Yeah, the Rhino mounts. Yep. So,
and then we also had the wire mitigation stuff because we were going through. I love how we give us everything such wonderful names, but all it is a PVC pipe, right, attached to the front of the truck that goes up and over the truck. So those low hanging wires will slide, hopefully, over, and you don't, cut people's electricity. So,
did you get the Caymans brand new?
I don't. Yeah, I think we did.
So lucky.
Yeah. Yep, because, as a matter of fact, we did, because I remember the seats were not dusty or anything else, and we had to reconfigure things because each vehicle was designated as something else on top of it, whether it was a Casevac vehicle or whatever. Right, so we reconfigured the back seats to do that, and then we could transport people in the back if we needed to, and some of the other ones that weren't configured with litters or with radio stuff and all that stuff. So
there are a few sensations as amazing as getting a brand new piece of equipment for the first time. It's the first time anybody's ever used it.
Yeah.
And you open up the weapons crate and it's got all the packing grease and everything still in there. Or you get a vehicle and it doesn't, the seats don't smell like other people have been in there.
Yeah.
That's putting it mildly. Yeah.
Yes, I'm trying to be as consumer friendly as possible.
Yeah.
But everybody knows what I mean. But yeah, I'm jealous.
Yeah. Yep. It was pretty fantastic. So yeah, lots of miles. Got to see lots of things. We got to see a whole lot of the Iraqi countryside. Yeah, the one time we did get hit, it was my vehicle. This is after the SOFA agreement stuff, and so we had to be escorted by local police through cities.
They call it what? Provincial Iraqi control?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it was, August 29th, I believe. And we're doing our mission like we always do. We called up, but it was taking a little bit longer than usual to get the police escort over to the other side. They'd take us across the bridge and then up into Tikrit proper. And then once you get to, there's a T intersection. If you go right, that's a really bad part of town. But if you go left, it takes you to the highway. And right by the highway, there's an Iraqi army base. So that was the way we always went. Anyways, so we're sitting there waiting, calling back to the base. They're relaying the message. They're then getting the message back and relaying it to us, right? So all this exchange just, takes forever. I think we were there for maybe an hour and a half just waiting on this escort. And it's like, God, can we just drive through? Like, we're not going to do anything. Like, this is what we do all the time. This isn't the first time we've done it. Of course we can't. So finally we get an escort. Not the usual vehicles. There's some Iraqi police in there, but there's an additional truck that we haven't seen before. But I was like, okay. And we start going, but we're going super slow. And I'm like, okay, things have taken longer. There's a new truck in here. We're going not the same speed we normally do, right? All the alarm bells are going off.
It's all starting to go, yeah.
Right. And so I immediately call up on the radio. I was like, hey, just keep your eyes peeled, right? We're going to go across this bridge. Just keep your distance. Once we get across the bridge, remember there's the low-lying areas on the right-hand side. There's the market over there. But there's always people there, right? So if there's people there, like, we should be fine. But just keep your eyes open. So we get through, and we come across the bridge, and we're going up. And my front guy calls, and he says, hey, there's nobody in the market. And I said, okay, we need to go. And he's like, we can't. The truck is going too slow in front of us, right?
Yep.
Exactly. And that's when it hit, right? I remember this so vividly, and it's weird that I can't remember, that explosion. It didn't happen on my vehicle, and then I remember this. It's almost like time stood still or went really slow, because I remember seeing the dust start to fly up nice and slow inside the cab, and then I felt the concussion. And I called up on the radio, hey, we've been hit, but we're still rolling. And the front truck called back and said, can you still go? And I said, yes, let's go. We need to get out of here. I said, I don't care if the truck's in the way, run them over, right?
Sorry,
and
just a clarification. You say we're still rolling. I'm sorry, I thought you meant rolling over.
No.
You mean you're still moving?
Yes,
okay.
Rolling forward.
Got it. Okay.
Not rolling.
Got it. Okay.
We're still moving. Yes.
Thank you.
And so he pushes on and pushes that truck out of the way. I see it as we drive by, because now we're flying and we don't care about police escort or anything, right?
Yep.
So we get through there. That truck is off to the side. We go and we stop at the Iraqi army base, and we assess, what happened and try to figure out, okay, what's going on and everything else. So we look at our truck, and there's really nothing wrong, right? Initial thoughts, obviously, is this is an IED that's hit us, but not 100% sure. There's a bunch of paint and stuff that's been deflected off. My gunner has shrapnel in his goggles. There's a whole bunch of shrapnel in the net that was covering the gunner's spot, right, the turret, and our wire mitigation piece of PVC pipe is completely missing. So we're like, okay, what did we hit, or what happened? We called it up, and eventually somebody had come out to do an investigation on the scene and everything else.
Is it still Task Force Troy back then? The IED investigation team?
I have no idea. Way beyond my level, because we weren't battle space owners. So not my coordination. But we just sent back the reports as best as possible and tried to do as much of a description as we could. What they found when they went back is they found an unexploded RKG-3, which is the copper-lined penetrating grenade.
That's it, yeah.
Thankfully, the people that threw it basically missed. One of them missed completely, or if he did hit, it was a dud. And the other guy that hit actually hit the wire mitigation, and that's what caused the explosion. It basically exploded. If that shield wasn't there for the gunner, it would have absolutely peppered his entire face.
Yeah.
So thankfully he wore his goggles. He had a scratch on his neck.
Ballistic eye pro.
Yes, because that shrapnel was sticking into those goggles. So yeah, crazy.
And then you just Charlie Mike.
Yeah, so once we did the assessment on the damage,
Continue mission.
Drove back to the base. We told everybody about what had happened, and it was probably about 2 weeks later. All throughout this time, anyways. So I didn't really mention it because it wasn't part of the story, but all this mileage, I'm looking at the roads and I'm assessing, like, okay, there's holes here, there's
garbage,
things here, right? And I'm writing down where these things are at. And so when we get back on each one of these trip reports, I'm sending back what was
essentially terrain analysis.
Looking at everything and saying, okay, here's where each one of these things are, and sending it back to our intel team, our S2. And so they would periodically send stuff to me in an email and say, okay, hey, do you know where this is? We have snippets of this video, or we have still pictures of this. So about 2 weeks after that incident, they sent They sent like 8 or 10 still frames of this thing, and I'm like, I have no idea where this thing's at. Most of the time we weren't able to help because the pictures were too grainy, or it was too zoomed in and you couldn't really see. So every time I asked, where's the video, I can at least look at it and say, okay, based on where this is, I can figure out roughly terrain association, so to speak, with buildings and houses and everything else, where these things are at. So say all that to say that about 2 weeks after this incident, after they'd sent the pictures, they sent the video, and it's got the music in the background, and it's somebody filming from the other side of the street, our convoy. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize it at first because we're watching trucks go by, and I'm like, there was one of our trucks that had the signs that we had to post on the front and back of our trucks about, I don't know, whatever it was in Arabic.
Get out of the way.
Yeah, right. Like stay fit, stay back, whatever they said. One of ours on our truck was cut out absolutely weird, just the way that that our people wanted, or that team wanted to put it on their truck where they put it. And I was like, that's our truck. Wait, this is the incident. Like, yeah, I know exactly where this is. I can tell you, 100%.
Ask me how
what
I know.
It is, right? Yeah, exactly. So, at some point, they ended up giving me a copy of the video, and I had it. I don't know if I still have it because, we're talking 2008, 2009. No, it's 2009. So we're talking about solid state hard drives, and they're maybe a couple gigs max, right? We're not into terabytes yet. So yeah, I may or may not have that.
We'll talk
still.
afterwards. We'll include it in if you still got it.
Okay. Well, that incident happens towards the end of that tour.
Yes.
So your third.
Yeah, your
My third deployment.
Your third time in Iraq.
3 days after, the individuals who are in Afghanistan are looking for Bo Bergdahl. So 3 days after a friend of mine in Alaska was killed, looking for him. So this is why this is one of those events that I remember very, very, very well, So, yes.
So how much longer was it that you were in country before you turned around and went back? From the grenade incident to.
So back on mission.
To your return stateside.
Oh, so it was November, right before Thanksgiving of the same year. So we're talking 2009. So end of August to end of November.
Okay.
So you were right there at the end of your tour, of course, when things go sideways.
Right.
Yeah. Of course.
Yes.
Okay.
So you're back in Alaska, and I know some big stuff is coming up on as far as career decisions and stuff. So you got some big decisions ahead of you. Tell us about that.
So oddly enough, while we were in Tikrit, we were basically right next to a reserve CA unit. And then across the street from them was the, it was 3rd Brigade, 25th ID. That was the battle space owner. So their active duty CA guy was there, and he basically, I was interested in doing something more than deploying to Iraq and only helping the U.S. Army. I wanted to do something that was more directly involved to help the people that were there, to help get us out of wherever we were at. And I didn't think we were doing it by driving 15,000 miles in a year. Job satisfaction, sure, but not as much as being able to be involved and engaged with locals and helping with the whole reason why we're there in the first place. So talked with him. He said, here's what you got to do, here's what we do on active duty, here's the point of contact, send your stuff here and whatever else. And
he gave you a first name, call Al.
He, oddly enough, he did. Yes, and Al was able to take my packet and put me on assignment relatively quickly. So I filled all that stuff out before I even left Iraq and sent it up. And so by the time we got back, I knew before Christmas that I was going to be coming to Fort Bragg. And it was going to be really quick.
So you would have been one of the first, probably not the first, but very early on, civil affairs assessment and selection classes.
I should have been, but was not.
Okay.
So the classes after me were the first ones that went through.
Okay.
There were some people that were in my class that went through the pilot course, but not all of us went through.
Okay. You and I might have gone through the same time. We can talk later about that.
Okay. So how long was it from the time that you returned stateside to the time you left?
2 months.
Yeah, it's a turn and burn.
That is a fast turnaround.
Yeah. So I wanted to get out of Alaska because I had already been there for 5 years, and
You skipped winter.
Yeah.
That's cheating.
Right. Drove out. I took some leave and drove out of Alaska and drove all the way across Canada and the U.S. And I stopped back in the UP for a couple days, saw the family, and that was it. Went down, got down here, and it basically just had to buy my time until I went to jump school. Finally,
For real this time.
for real this time. And so I was basically TDY en route. So even though I reported here, because I needed to put my family in a house, right? We couldn't be TDY en route that entire time. So I signed into post, but I didn't actually sign into the unit. So, did jump school. My old company commander was down at Benning for whatever, I don't know, some sort of whatever officer training he needed to do. So got him to pin my jump wings on me.
Very cool.
So yeah, it was pretty cool to be able to do that. And now, oddly enough, out of this job I just left, he is the director, and he was my boss once again. So, small world.
It's a small army.
Well,
Yeah.
the CA world is incredibly small.
Yes.
You're not our first CA guest, so we've talked a little bit in the past about who CA is and what we do. So we'll kind of talk over that once you get to your first unit. So you don't do selection,
Right.
but you do go through the Q course.
Correct.
So tell us about the Q course, qualification course.
Well, I went through the French stuff first. So my language that I was taught in 4 months was French. I picked it up relatively quickly. But and then being able to maintain it was just kind of one of those, I didn't put a ton of effort into it because there really wasn't a need, especially if you're going to Africa and you're working with locals. Your use of French is really limited. So typically only educated people in those countries speak French. Otherwise they speak their local dialect. Anyways, I digress. So yeah, language school, and then on to the qualification course itself. I went through that without really any issues. Interesting, the way that the training and everything else has evolved since I went through, and I would say anybody who went through before, it's significantly evolved from the 4-week course to 6 to 8 to what it is now. But yeah, I mean, it wasn't anything strange or out of the ordinary. I was relatively comfortable with what we were taught. It was putting some doctrinal things to what I had already done in my career, and so now it's just a little bit of a different mission. I got selected to be part of one of the first 18 Charlie pilot courses, so I did that afterwards.
So it's an 18 Charlie.
Special Forces Engineer Sergeant. So they basically just ran us through the construction portion of that course, which was a couple weeks long. So reinforced some of the skills, gave me a few more skills in terms of construction things, but usability, applicability, beyond that, nope. I could probably be a general contractor, but in terms of using it in CA,
But he's built a really great back porch on his house with it.
may or may not have done a few projects, using some of the stuff that I was taught there. So, but yeah,
So you report into your first, you go through the qualification course, no issues, get a little extra training. That's pretty cool. And you show up to your first civil affairs unit, which is whom?
Well, before we go there,
Okay.
I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that a good portion of our class got the, I guess, devastating news that they were going to the 85th Brigade.
Ah, yes.
We were one of the first classes that started sending people. So
May it rest in peace.
there was that turmoil going on in the course. But I ended up going to 91st Civil Affairs Battalion, so I didn't have to leave Fort Bragg. And that is the AFRICOM Battalion. And I went to Bravo Company, back in the old World War II barracks.
Oh, yeah.
And we were there for quite a while, until the new, all the new stuff was built. So.
Right.
Going back a little bit, did you choose French, or was it chosen for you?
It was chosen for me. I filled out a dream sheet.
Was French anywhere on it?
It was at the bottom. I had put Spanish up front.
It should be.
So, I know that you know this. The way it works, you take an aptitude, the D-Lab or the D-Lat, they keep changing the name of it, but it's the Defense Language Aptitude Battery Test. And whatever score you get on that is going to be a difficulty. And whatever that's going to drive the train on what language you end up getting. So, unfortunately, if you score a very high score on that and you want, and I'm using the air quotes now, an easy language like French, you're probably going to get Mandarin Chinese, so congratulations. So, again, back to your point, it's also needs of the Army, so 91st was one of the last battalions that they were going to fill out, so they needed to fill those positions, so that it's going to drive the train on language. There's always different factors.
Yeah. And the way languages are assigned now versus how they were assigned before is significantly different.
Yes.
So there's multiple factors. Regardless, I got what I got. Even though Spanish was at the top, I had taken 2 years of Spanish in high school, so I was already familiar with the structure of the language. So that set me up for success for French because...
Very, very similar.
It's plug and play.
Yeah. They're both Romance languages. So,
Yeah. So AFRICOM is the newest of the geographic combatant commands that we've established at headquarters for in the U.S. military. So tell us about being part of a new civil affairs battalion that's mandate is one of the largest continents that is a new command for us.
I can't speak to AFRICOM itself other than what I know of some of the incidents that came from standing up a new command and what transpired downrange. Deployments, specifically CA deployments, a lot of fraud, waste, and abuse in terms of projects that were done, why they were done, how they were managed, and how they were followed up on, after the fact. Yeah, right, exactly. It's no secret. There's a scathing report that came out about the time I was in Africa about the fraud, waste, and abuse that transpired, and that basically led to most, if not all, of the CA units that were out in each one of the different countries in East Africa being pulled out completely, and we had to try to fight our way in just to do periodic or episodic engagements in each one of those countries. So
very challenging.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's our least developed theater, and then you have all that baggage that you're trying to deal with.
Yep. On top of trying to manage Afghanistan rotation. So my first rotation in the 91st was to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Before I ended up even going to Africa.
So let's explore that. Where'd you go?
Went up to the lost region of Balamurghab, which is in the very northwest of Afghanistan. took over for a team. We had a huge security bubble. So we had a lot of freedom of movement. We traveled light on side-by-sides and motorcycles and, stuff like that. So very rarely were we in up-armored vehicles. And a lot of our movements were long-distance movements, or, 10, 15, 20 miles on a motorcycle with kit, with guns, everything else. So it wasn't terrible. The area wasn't that bad. It was very culturally diverse because it was a settlement from back several years prior when Afghanistan did this giant resettlement thing where they started putting Uzbeks and Tajiks and Pashtuns all together in different places across Afghanistan. So this is just one of those places where you had a bunch of different backgrounds all living together and working together. Where things got dicey is when you went further east towards Mazar-e-Sharif.
Of course.
And further south towards I can't think of the name of the little village, but yeah, regardless, the first few months we were there were not really that bad, but then of course summer hits, fighting season, and we ended up one of our district governors ended up getting killed, and then we ended up having somebody else get killed on a mission that frankly probably should not have happened, but it did. I spent a lot of time in Herat though because I was the pay agent, and so I'd have to fly back and forth.
Mr. Moneybags.
Yep. To clear, right? And so, but then getting flights to and from this extremely remote location was difficult. So I probably spent that 8-month rotation, probably spent 3 to 4 months in Herat. Took forever to get out initially. And then...
Ring routes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And those flights, because if weather was even remotely bad...
they wouldn't even bother.
Yep, and the only way you could get there is a helicopter. Yep. So,
yeah. So for people listening, the ring routes were pre-planned, predetermined. I mean, routes, right? So you know, the bird's going to come in on this day at approximately this time, and there was some predictability to it. There still had to be coordination on who's getting on, who's getting off equipment, and all that, because these are finite resources.
Yep.
But ring routes can be your lifeline in a lot of ways if they're bringing material out to your outposts and all that. And it can also be your freedom bird out of a certain area, and in your case, you're trying to get money to and from places.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So that put a lot of constraint in terms of what we could do to help, and what we needed to do to be able to transition, because not too far into that deployment, we were told we were going to transition that entire area to the locals. And so we had to plan that out. Well, how do we lift all of our resources away from the people who have been so dependent on our resources, and trying to make them and develop processes to make them go to their own government to ask for the money. I get it, like the provincial government siphoning money from the federal government, and all the way down to the district and all the way down to the people. That doesn't mean you don't ask for it, right? And trying to force them to use that system. And so trying to establish some sort of semblance of governance and stuff like that. It was really difficult. We were co-located with Italians who had similar goals and tried to do the same through their own use of resources and language and everything else. But at the end of the day, we transitioned because transition was a time and not it was conditions based.
What year was this?
That would have been 2012. Yeah, 2012.
Were they still using the provincial reconstruction team model for this? Okay, so were the Italians were the PRT?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that was often the case. And the Italians, they did a lot of that in Iraq as well.
Right.
They had pretty good diplomatic missions to deal
Yeah.
with stuff like that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Were y'all ever, not the CA team, but just the special operations footprint, ever charged with providing the security for any of the provincial reconstruction team or any of their elements, or were there conventional forces that were responsible for that?
Actually, they provided their own, so they had an entire infantry outfit up there to do all of this stuff. So,
Regulars, not contractors?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Yep, so it was all Italian army up there.
Got it. Okay.
Providing their own security. So if they ever went out on mission, it was always
Okay.
their own. We were never. They would ask us if we needed to go or wanted to go.
Yeah.
You know, but usually we did missions separate, but reported to each other.
Yeah, but we had a pretty good relationship with our NATO partners. And
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on Afghanistan?
Other than the transition went exactly how you would expect it to. Within weeks of us leaving, all the equipment and all of the trucks and the radios and the guns and everything all went back to the Taliban. So yeah, we bragged that we were the first province to transition, or first district to transition, but in reality, it really wasn't. It wasn't conditions-based transition like it should have been.
This is foreshadowing day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you redeploy.
Yep.
Back to Fort Bragg.
Yep.
What happens next?
We're prepping for the next mission for Africa.
Okay. Welcome to the 95th.
Right, exactly. So we get our commander and our first sergeant leave. We get a new commander. We get a new first sergeant. We're doing all of our stuff. Basically trying to get into some semblance of what would be a red, amber, green cycle. Although it wasn't there yet, at least not in the 91st at that time. So at any rate, we know when our culmination exercise is going to be for pre-deployment and when we're going to be out the door, give or take. We had some issues that happened during that. We were the first company to go through what would be coined Operation Buckeye, where we would deploy the entire company with teams in different counties around Ohio and northern Kentucky. That's about it. And Indiana, eastern Indiana, to work with local government figureheads, emergency management people, whoever would buy into this thing. They would give us real world problems that we would try to come up with things to solve, but we would have to do reconnaissance and, different things to try and make that happen. And it was definitely not without incident. There are plenty of things that went wrong, but I think all in all, it was okay for our team. We ended up getting the city of Cincinnati, so we had to work with the regional EMA that's there in Cincinnati, and we had to work with the county administrator. He set us up with our location. Like, we slept on in the attic of the courthouse. So we had the FBI called on us because we set up our SDN communication satellite on the roof of the courthouse, and so people called to report us. Right?
Dan, when all this was going down, I was in the next battalion over, just kind of snickering the whole time. Yes.
Well, I mean, you have to applaud a vigilant population, right?
Right.
So, for people listening, for National Guard and Reserve is a whole other thing, but for the active duty force, there is a very high legal bar that has to be approved, signed. There is a lot that goes into the approval authorities for active duty to do anything involving the local population, meaning American citizens. It is an incredibly high bar, and sometimes that the homework gets done on that, but it doesn't necessarily, the information doesn't get shared.
Yeah.
And so that was the issue that y'all ran into.
Right.
Was, yes, vigilant, yes, but.
Yeah. So, regardless, we deploy. Each one of our company, or each one of our teams goes to different countries in Africa. My team ends up going to East Africa, so now we've got multiple countries, whereas everybody else has one country. About halfway through the deployment, my team leader got offered a job, I guess, if you want to call it that, a position to be a liaison in Kenya. So now I'm running the team, and we have 2 missions back to back, one in Uganda and one in Burundi, that we have to do that are joint ventures with the British CIMIC elements.
Your counterparts, basically.
Right.
Yep.
But I mean, all in all, that deployment wasn't terrible. We were based out of Camp Lemonnier in Djibouti. And that was kind of our just hub and spoke type of operation. We started there, and we would just kind of piecemeal out to different countries, across.
So when you say East Africa, you're including the Horn of Africa in that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so yeah, that is a vast area you're talking about.
Right.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So one CA team's ability to affect any sort of real change across that big of a region is limited. You know,
you're just kind of the pilot light at that point.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's how it's got to be.
Yep. So yeah, I mean, there's really not a whole lot to talk about. It was a great time. So you end up staying in some really nice places that you have no idea existed in those countries, and sometimes you stay in some really, really terrible places. And I would much rather be back in Kuwait in the desert than to be in those. So
yeah, you can go from staying in a 5-star resort to a 1-star resort in the same trip.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So
okay. So Africa, if you come home from that deployment, because generally those were always shorter than a year. So we're anywhere between 6 and 9 months was pretty standard. Does that sound about right?
Yep. That's absolutely right. So I got back in like May of 2014. Yeah, May of 2014, and my old team leader from Afghanistan was working up in the 3 shop. Doing future ops, and he's like, "Hey, you would be perfect. I need you to come up here and help out." And I was like, "All right, cool, sounds good. I've done my my required time on the team, so I've got nothing next lined up. So let's just do it and make it happen." And that was probably the best and worst decision of my life. There were some personalities that worked in the 3 shop that were very much of the same old head mindset that we find across CA. And if you're not part of the in crowd, you're not going anywhere. You're not doing anything. And that's where I found myself. Overworked and underpaid and
Over-scrutinized.
Over-scrutinized. And then if things were going well, I got none of the credit. Mm-hmm. Somebody else always got the credit.
It's a good deal if you can get it.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, so for 2 years, I was up in the 3 shop. Planned and helped execute JRTC rotation from up there, where I got to go down with them and actually play op 4. I got to do CA unconstrained. It was pretty awesome. I had limitless money to try and turn all the villages against the host or the brigade that was there.
You're a good bad guy, is that what you're saying?
I was a really good bad guy. Yeah, it was that was a really good time. But I was able to pick up a lot of lessons from the opposite side, being unconstrained, to be able to say, okay, this is kind of like how the enemy would think in certain circumstances, or in this thing. This is how they would use this criminal network, this army network, this, whatever the case is. Yeah. So That was a good time. But aside from that, I would say my time in the 3 shop was pretty forgettable. I did a lot of things like future operations and current operations, and then taskings for a little bit, and then I had to maintain the jump logs for a little while, even though I wasn't a jump master, and doing all these things because people were leaving and doing different things, and like, oh, just you're here,
Yeah.
take this on real
It's not
quick.
glorious, but it's got to get done.
Yeah. And so I was like juggling all these different glass balls all at the same time and then handing it back off when somebody new got up there. But I mean, whether it was 2 weeks or whether it was 2 months, it's still, on top of doing a regular job. It was really taxing and really stressful on top of being hated, basically, from people that were over me.
So you were up there for about 2 years.
Yep.
So this would be around 2016, 2017?
Mm-hmm.
So you're getting close to 20.
Yes, I am holding on by a moment. I've already gone in def, right, on my contract. And we're in 2015. I would say that the end of my time in the 3 shop in 2015 was probably the best because some of those old heads had moved. One of my counterparts that was the current ops NCO for a while got moved down to a company. He was the operations sergeant. He went forward and he had to come back. And he, by name, requested me to come replace him. And really the intent was for me in July of 2015 to go over there into Germany and just kind of smooth the transition between one company and the next company when they did their rip because he was going to be gone. But I had to learn, right? The learning curve was really steep at the time. And I had to manage some difficult personalities, especially with the individuals from these 2 different companies because they were very much different.
As in the leadership and the team members were different, or their approaches were different?
Yes.
Yes to all.
Yes to all. But I guess I did well enough that the company that came in requested me to stay, and so I stayed for the entire rotation with them. So I ended up spending 6 months in Germany.
Yeah, so Special Operations Command Africa
Yes.
is located in Germany.
Correct.
Just for those listening, they're thinking, why is he in Germany and not in Africa?
Yes.
So
Important detail to note for sure. Yep, so I got back in January of 2016 from there, and it was time for me to go, right? So I am looking for my next assignment, and I am talking with a branch manager at HRC, and I'm like, hey...
Human Resources come in.
Right. Mm-hmm. Hey, I really want to go down to JRTC, right? I had a good time while I was down there. I want to do the observer controller trainer mission on the soft side and, do those things. I think it would be really great. It'd be good for my career, everything else. So we go through. He's like, sure, well, we can try to make that happen. And I went behind everybody's back to make this happen because one of those old heads was trying to put me in the Brigade 3 instead of having me PCS. And I knew going to the Brigade 3 would kill my career. So I was trying to take charge of my own career. And, the CSM didn't like that too much. And, but it was what it was. And it was already too late. So everything's all set in motion. But then I got the news that EFMP was denied. So Exceptional Family Member Program, where you have family members who, have special needs and medical services or whatever it is not available in that location. So
having been stationed at Fort Polk as an EFMP service member, there's not a lot there. So yeah, I get it.
I even put in a rebuttal and tried to get them to change it, and they wouldn't. I said, nope, we can't take you on. So that's when the conversation happened about, well, hey, so what about HRC? You know, what about Fort Knox? Do you want to go to Fort Knox, or do you want to go to Fort Campbell? I was like, well, I've already been to Fort Campbell. I wouldn't mind going to 5th Group and, you know, doing whatever. He's like, no, you really should go and come to HRC and work up here. I was like, okay, I can read tea leaves.
I'll bite.
Sure.
Okay.
let's do it. So I had to interview with the brigade CSM, and he had the guy that was up there on the phone, and, you know, said, hey, all right, so is this who you want? He's like, yep. And that was it. And within a few months, I was on assignment, and I reported up there in September of 2016 to start my adventure as a branch manager.
Well, this is going to be an interesting part of the discussion because everybody loves HRC. But before we get to it, let's take a break. So you're off to HRC.
Yes.
The crusher of souls and dreams.
Although Louisville's a fun party town, though.
Yeah, I mean, it can be. It's Louisville's an interesting place, depending on where you go, for sure.
It's Louisville or Lowell.
Louisville.
Just Lowell.
Lowell.
I think every single resident of Louisville has a different way to say it.
I grew up saying it Louisville until I got there, and I was like, oh, that's not how you say that.
The locals are like,
Louisville.
Okay.
Yeah. But all right, so you're off to HRC. What did you know going in?
That they put people on assignment.
That's about it.
That was about it, right?
Here's your sign.
And, you know, in terms of how things were done, I knew that at least within CA, basically the brigade CSM was the one who made all the decisions.
Yeah. Big Papa.
Right. So I didn't really know what to expect going up there.
You were there. It was towards the. Let me rephrase this. It was kind of the beginning of the end for the 85th while you were there.
Yeah.
So, to explain to all the people listening, that means we're gonna shrink the size of the active on the active duty side. We're literally gonna cut it in half. So, what does this mean for you, and what do we do with all these people?
Yeah. So we have more people than we have authorizations to put them in. So we have to find places for them. Thankfully, though, we have a history of not filling authorizations anywhere outside of a civil affairs unit, which is really problematic in many ways, which would, I don't know, could be its own podcast on its own that could take hours and hours. So I won't get into the details. But yeah, basically we had to figure out who we were going to put where, who needed time or who could benefit from more time in an operational CA unit versus who was ready to go out and, you know, represent CA to the rest of the Army in some of these other positions that weren't traditionally filled. What kind of challenges they were going to face depending on where they were at, if they were in a sustainment brigade or if they were in a division or, you know, in a corps level asset. Like, there's just a range of things that needed to be done. And meanwhile, I'm trying to learn the job and everything else and what all this stuff means anyways at the same time. Yeah. So to say it wasn't easy is an understatement.
Okay. How many angry phone calls, emails did you get from people that you sent to the various ends of the earth?
Objection, Your Honor. That is a totally loaded question. He's leading the witness.
Everyone who has dealt with HRC knows exactly what I'm talking about.
To be honest, I didn't get a lot of phone calls initially, and that's because the MO really within CA was don't call branch. And if you got caught calling branch, prepare to face the wrath. At least on the enlisted side.
You had said that when you were trying to get down to polk that your brigade or your sergeant major was upset with you. Is that because you had called branch?
Yes,
that was the taboo.
Yeah.
This is totally accurate. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the number of phone calls is not as terrible or egregious as you would think. However, I opened Pandora's box while I was up there, and I encouraged open communication. I encouraged transparency, much to the dismay of many of the E8s and E9s who are trying to control their people, basically.
Emphasis on control.
Yes. Control them, the careers, the deployments, all the predictability, things that they thought they could control in terms of predictability. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And of course, angering the leadership creates its own set of issues.
It does. Because they have their own priorities, and a majority of the individuals within the branch reside within that operational force. Though the branch cannot exist without authorizations outside of the operational force. Again, I won't get into details as to why, but it's not really feasible for that to happen. So it's a balancing act of trying to maintain those relationships, because at some point you've got to go back, and trying to do the right thing for people in the future and try to set precedents, and get things started on the right track, because if you don't start somewhere, then things will never change.
Yep. Right.
We thankfully had a great individual who was on his way in to take over as the brigade CSM, who wholeheartedly believed in HRC having control over individuals' careers. So he really empowered us to do our jobs effectively. And so we met up with him several months before he got into position. We discussed what we wanted to do, what things were wrong, and how we could change it, and all that stuff. And he's like, "I like it. It's a solid plan. We're gonna do it as soon as I take over." And
that is called buy-in,
right?
Yeah.
And very much to the dismay of CSMs who were
in place.
Still kind of stuck in that older mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was some trial and error. I went and met with our officer counterparts to figure out how they did things, and that really kind of set up how we would approach it with the enlisted side, with some minor tweaks, because we didn't have systems in place. So a lot of it was just hand jammed to try and figure it out. But we needed quality people to go out. We also knew that what's your number one reason for going to a position as an enlisted person? It's, I want to get promoted most of the time.
Yeah. Upward mobility.
Right?
Yep.
So, I saw so-and-so go to this location and they got promoted. I want to go there. And so knowing that and just having that mindset going into this thing, that was the biggest motivation. But it's going to take time, right? It's going to take 1, 2, 3 years for this to come to fruition. So how do we make it happen? Well, we got to look at everybody's file and say, okay, who's going to compete the best in all of these promotion boards every year? And so that was kind of the genesis of how this merit-based assignment thing would come to fruition. And so we started getting with the promotions branch at HRC, and how do you guys do the boards? How do you do these? How do you do that? And we basically made up our own kind of way of making that happen. And so we would figure out who's eligible to leave. And then we would pull all their files, and we would just independently, we would score them. And whoever had the highest score, right, that just became that 1 to N list of who we were going to select. And if you were below a certain cut line, you weren't going to go at all, because you still need more development. There's no reason to send you out to represent. We would rather gap that position for the next time, and that position then becomes a higher priority than anything else on that list.
I'm not going to lie to you, that sounds exhausting.
It was absolutely exhausting, on top of fielding phone calls and doing the day-to-day things, putting people on assignment and everything else. Yeah, absolutely. Because I had to build the system in the background, and I had to better track individuals. Because when I got up there, it showed that we had maybe 10 people that were in different assignments outside the operational force. The reality is there was like 40 or 50 that were just out, and nobody knew where they were at.
Nobody knew where they were.
So
I know, because I was in Korea and I had 2 of those individuals with me. Yes.
So
maybe a story over beer for another day.
Right. I mean, that was really priority number 1, was figuring out where everyone was before we could implement anything else. We had to know what we had and who we had and where it was.
Frontline trace.
So one of the most basic things of being a leader in the military is accountability, knowing the whereabouts of your people.
Yeah.
And what you're telling me is that wasn't happening for years.
Pretty much, yeah. And no effective way of tracking it. And when people were supposed to come out of position.
Yeah.
They would just, I guess, wait until the individual out there called. And if they never called, maybe they stay there for however long they stay there. And that's it. Like, yeah.
That's how you get people homesteading.
That infuriates me, but at the same time, I'm completely unsurprised.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I mean that came to fruition. We were able to implement. We had to make some minor tweaks.
How long did it take for you to actually get things to where you thought they should be, or maybe 95%?
It probably took about a year. That's when we had more buy-in from people outside, like just individual soldiers who would contact us and know that they were getting honest feedback, getting CSMs to give us the names of individuals who were actually eligible and not scheduled for deployment, and not trying to hoard them, and getting an accurate list. It's just a multitude of things, because I could trust one individual to give us a list of names, and I couldn't trust 3 others, and then there's somebody else that I had to back check. So it's like, I might as well just go ahead and check all of them, because you never know if you're getting honest feedback, honest assessments from individuals. So
it's wild.
Yeah.
So let's HRC. You do this 2-3 years?
3 years.
3 years. Is this your last assignment?
It's not.
So what do you do after HRC?
I get to choose where I want to go,
which is common for that position, right? I mean,
that's kind of the
deal.
Yeah. Unspoken rule. You get to choose where you want to go. So, at that time, when I first got up there, I was gunning for promotion. I was like, I knew it was a long shot, but I was like, okay, well, cool. So I got to change a rater before the board. We had just changed the eval system, so now we're giving out MQs and stuff like that. So I get an MQ there, make sure everything's up to date, everything else fine, okay, get passed over. Okay, then the next year, same thing, and I said, okay, if I get passed over again this year after having an MQ and then another MQ, and being up at HRC, right? If I get passed over again, this is it. Like, this is the writing on the wall. I'm gonna go ahead and retire. So I thought I made it, because the way it used to work, before they made significant changes and several incremental changes. A friend of mine, a former first sergeant, the one from Bravo Company, the one that got me the airborne assignment, worked in a section that had to review the people that were selected for promotion, right? And check their records and make sure that everything was good, that they were qualified to be promoted. What they did is they took that list plus 10% from the cut line. Mm-hmm. And so he could only see, X number 1 through whatever, 50 or whatever. Mm-hmm. So my name was on that list. So for 2 months, I was like, this is awesome. I just got to wait for the list. I'm going to get promoted. And then I've got to wait until my, number comes up. But it's still, I'm on the list, right? So it's going to happen. And when the list came out, my name wasn't on it.
You were in the 10%.
I was in the 10%. Mm-hmm. So you couple that with my previous thought of like, all right, cool. If I don't make it, I'm out. And I was pretty much done.
And at this point, you're at 18 years?
Yeah. Yep. I'm at 18 years. And so I'm really not trying to get promoted the next go around.
You're just looking for the last stop and trying to make it as pleasant as possible.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I choose to go to the civil affairs proponent to hopefully work in the personnel division, because it's just a natural transition
from HRC.
Yeah, HRC, right? As things would have it, that wouldn't end up happening. I would end up going into force modernization before it was pulled out of the proponent and put into USASOC as a unified type of entity. But it gave me an opportunity to work on a few things that were going to transform the branch for the future. All of that to say that, yes, I got to choose my assignment, and that was the benefit of being at HRC. So, yes, I chose my assignment, but I didn't get to choose exactly where I went. But I did eventually end up in the personnel section. So,
when did you know, when did you know that it was time to drop your papers? Because you already knew, like the writing was on the wall. You were going to retire, but at some point you have to put the paperwork in. So
yeah,
when was that moment for you?
That moment for me was, I would say, the actual decision of I am going to retire was when I got selected for promotion. The year I didn't try, the year I didn't update anything.
Yep.
Right.
That is not uncommon.
That's how they get you.
Yeah.
Yep.
So here I am. I'm at 19 years, and I'm like, okay, so let's do the math. Mm-hmm. All right, I'm at 19, so I talked to my good friend at HRC who works in doing the promotions, right, and doing the projections in terms of like, okay, we know that we're going to promote this many in this month and, mm-hmm. everything else. So I said, all right, give or take, based on your experience and everything else, when should I expect to pin, right? And she's like, you're looking at probably like 18 months from now.
Mm-hmm. Which would put you over 20, and it would then project you to not be able to retire at the new rank for 3 years.
Correct. Right. So we're talking about 23-ish years.
Pushing to around 25 before you retire.
Right.
Yep.
So I'm doing the math, and I'm like, okay, so if I've got to wait, I'm going to be at maybe 20, 21 before I pin. And then I've got to compete for a first sergeant position. Mm-hmm. I've got to do at least 24 months in a first sergeant position. So that may or may not happen immediately. So depending on when things fall, I could be at 24 years time in service by the time I'm done with my first sergeant time. That gives me 2 years until I hit the retention control point. And what are my chances for getting another first sergeant position to then be competitive for sergeant major? And then if I do get selected for the academy, that's another 5-year commitment. I'm already over 25. Like, you just start adding these things up, and it just doesn't make sense. I'm like, no.
Well, it could if that's what you want.
Yeah, sure. But any aspirations of being a battalion CSM are really, really slim. All the stars have to align. Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I now have to be an E8 and answer to a brigade CSM who I absolutely do not agree with, right? Who will control my career anyway. So my chances of getting a first sergeant position are already difficult. But then staying in position and not be hunted is another one. So I'm just I was being real at the time, and I was like, all right, my chances are slim to none. So what am I leaving on the table? How much money am I leaving on the table? What career am I leaving on the table? Because ageism is a thing, right? And so it's something that we have to combat in the civilian world, where we don't have to really combat it in the military. So who wants to hire a 50-year-old individual? Just the risk was not worth the reward. So that was the moment I knew. Is when I made that decision, and then I ended up dropping my paperwork in January of 2020 to retire December 31st of 2021.
So you have to defer. I'm sorry, you don't have to. You chose to defer a promotion.
Yeah.
So just. To people who've never served in the military, that probably sounds bonkers, but based off of what you just laid out, it totally makes sense if that's what you want.
Right. What the military likes to do, and it seems to me far more common on the enlisted side, is when you are approaching retirement, they will dangle one last promotion in front of you so that they can get that last little bit of juice for very little reward or cost to them.
Yeah.
Because there are people that will snap it up. Like, finally, it's my time. I'm getting promoted. No, you're being used.
Well, on the officer side, the time horizons are different, but it is similar in that it is not a coincidence the way they time out your professional development timeline.
Yes.
And it's and you've seen behind the curtain. So, yeah.
So with all that being said, would you say that you got out on your own terms?
No, and that's because as luck would have it, some things are just beyond your control, right? So we had this thing called COVID hit right after I submitted my paperwork. So I'm starting, I'm going through my transition stuff, and I'm looking at jobs, and I'm looking at the job market, and I'm looking at the job market specifically in the HR field, and I'm like, this is not good. I need to push my retirement back at least 6 months, right? But in order to do that, you still had to be within the 12-month window. So I had to wait until after July, because I wanted to be done basically at the end of July or the end of August of the following year, instead of being, December 31st. So I submit the paperwork. I'm obviously citing COVID as the reason, and the job market and everything else. And so all this time I'm waiting until middle of October. The beginning of October, I'm supposed to start clearing. I'm supposed to be on permissive TUI. Right. I haven't done any of that. I haven't done any clearing stuff yet. And it's like the second week of October, and I get the notification that my request had been denied.
And it is too late for you to even try to rebuttal.
Basically, yes. So, and the response is, oh, yeah, not only is this denied, but you're going to continue on with your original retirement date.
Which is like 90 days away.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to be on leave already. So, I'm just like, oh my God, this is terrible. Thankfully, I had worked with the guy that signed the memo. So he worked in retention branch when I was at HRC. So I reached out to him direct because he was working in transition branch up there. He's the one that signed the orders or the memo. And I reached out to him direct. I was like, hey, I'm like supposed to be on leave right now, and I just got this. So what am I supposed to do? Like, I don't have enough time. And he responded back right away, and he said, hey, good to see you. Glad you're doing good. Here's what you need to do. You need to just submit an entire retirement revocation. Cite COVID as your reason. It will get approved for sure. Okay, cool. I've got it in writing. It's in an email. We're good.
Print.
Right, exactly. So I'm going through that process. At the same time, I'm in the midst of potentially needing to have shoulder surgery. Okay, well, that's not going to work. That's going to delay the timeline. And this place is not exactly well known for being great with surgeries. So I really don't want them to cut me open, because not only did they mess this up, my collarbone is broken. They said it didn't need to be fused back together. But if you look at my collarbone, it clearly needed to be fused back together. So that was strike number one. But both of the labrums are torn on my shoulders. And they wanted to go in and operate on all of it at the same time. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. But where does that put us at? Where are we at? So this is going back and forth over a few different appointments from basically September through October and into November. And finally, I made the decision that no, you're not going to operate. And they said, okay, we're going to do the write-up then for you to be medically retired and go through the medical evaluation board. Okay, fine, sure, that works. It's a way out. And so that process starts. My PCM writes up whatever they've got to write. I get referred to the MEB, and I get accepted in like the early December. Meanwhile, I had submitted my revocation for my retirement. Mm-hmm. It got lost in staffing in the building. I'm reaching out to my transition counselor, who has gone completely radio silence on me. Hey, I've got this revocation that I've got going through. Do I need to pull it back because the medical evaluation board thing is going to take precedence? Like, what do I need to do? Nothing. Crickets, right? So I'm thinking that it just takes a while for my revocation to go through, and I didn't know it was stuck in staffing until it was, I don't know, maybe the middle of December or towards the end of December, and I didn't hear anything. And so I'm going, okay, where's this thing at? And finally it took an E9 to go upstairs to figure out where it was at to get an answer, because I had asked multiple times. And they were able to get it pushed through and get pushed to HRC. But if you're already coded in the system for retirement, mm-hmm. you're pretty much going to be going to retirement. Nothing's going to turn that off. So for all intents and purposes, I was out of the Army on 1 January with no paycheck, right? I never out-processed anything. And so when I tell people this story, I'm like, look, if the Army wants you out and you've made a decision to get out on that date, you will be out. And it doesn't matter what you do. CIF be damned. Nothing is going to stop you from getting out. And that's exactly what happened. We had to pull strings and call people and do all this stuff all during Christmas, right? When nobody's in the office anyways, to try and get me put back in the system and back into the Army. My pay was messed up for probably 3 months after that. My revocation obviously got approved. Yeah, so that was a headache, and I'm going through the MEB process at the same time, right? So now my end is unknown, and I have no clue what's going to happen and when. So I go through the MEB, and I have to go to all these appointments, right? Go through the VA stuff. I've got all this coaching and, hey, make sure you do this, do that, document this. When you go through your exams, say this, do that, right? Okay, great, got it. Get through all of it. What they don't tell you is that the communication between the contracted element and the VA don't always communicate. So message sent from one organization to the VA is not message received. Mm-hmm. So not all of my exams made it. And so the VA wasn't processing my stuff. And so I couldn't move forward. So my time in the MEB process was delayed. And this happened twice. So all of this is happening. I'm still in the Army. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do. I'm still kind of working, but kind of not. And I'm trying to apply for jobs. And I'm like, well, I don't know what my end date is. So, that's not really feasible to do anyways. So yeah, a whole lot of uncertainty. July rolls around. I get my results back. They find me fit by presumption. Why? Because my revocation didn't go through before the MEB stuff was accepted. Had it gone through on time, I wouldn't have been found fit by presumption. They would have medically discharged me or medically retired me, and I would have been able to choose a little bit better. And there's a few other things that could have happened with that. So when I get those results, I had already been given the initial job offer to work at the CA proponent as a DA civilian. I was like, okay, well, great. Now I've got to, I don't know what I'm going to do, right? Because I've got to delay this. I've either got to delay it so I can retire properly, again, submit a regular retirement again to do all this. So I get through processing this stuff. I'm like, all right, cool. I'm just going to submit my retirement for 90 days out, and it's fine. And they're like, okay, so cool. So by the way, when you do this, you did all your VA exams and stuff, and that's great. But you got to resubmit your VA thing because all your stuff from the med board is not it's
not admissible.
Yeah, it's not admissible, right? Your exams are, but that actual claim is tied to the
MEB.
MEB. Yeah. Okay, cool, great. Not thinking in my head, you're not going to get your benefits on discharge if you are within 90 days. So when it came time for me to retire, right? Oh, hey, it's the first of the month. Oh, you get lumped in with all the other veterans and their claims. So even though all that stuff was done, it still took them a few months to do it. And the coordination on the backside between DFAS and Army and VA doesn't happen. So that way your stuff doesn't get withheld if you're, potentially under 50% or whatever, and they do the offset. I don't learn all this until after I'm out, and I'm like, oh, great. So my first paycheck from the VA wasn't even the full thing, right? Of course. So I had to wait until, just like everyone else who's trying to do their claim after they're out, I've got to wait for that timeline to hit where DFAS says, yes, you get everything concurrently. So I say all that to say that I did not get my correct retirement and disability paychecks until February of the following year.
Which would have been, at that point, 2023.
2022.
2022.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Thankfully, though, that allowed me to accept the offer for that GS role, and I started in November. So I was basically off. I took 30 days of leave. I was out 1 October, and then I was jobless from 1 October to 8 November. And then obviously you got to wait for the different pay periods before you start actually getting paid. So once all said and done, I had been without work for probably 3 months and getting paid for it.
And you should have been retired a year before.
Yes.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, despite that horrendous
That's a
last,
great setup.
we'll call it the last 18 months, right? So
Yep.
You came in, a kid out of just the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, straight out of high school, very, very small school with not a whole lot of choices going on. And you came in because Top Gun made you want to fly stuff.
Yes.
And you held a lot of different positions, from being an engineer to being in charge of security detail to civil affairs to being one of Satan's minions at HRC. I mean,
being a professional patient.
Yeah.
Right.
A lot of different experiences, a lot across a broad-ranging career.
Yeah.
Would you do it all again? If you could go back, would you do it all again?
Yeah, I would. I think the trade-off of experience and all of that has been worth it. Has everything been worthwhile? Probably not. I've got physical issues. I've got a plethora of mental issues that go along with service. So yeah. But it allows me to empathize with others who go through traumatic experiences. And it allows me to understand from a much different level than many other people can understand. And so I think that's a great ability, as well as being a huge disability at the same time.
It makes sense.
Yeah. Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show and being, transparent with us.
Yeah.
And someday, Dan and I want to do a special or two kind of revolving around some mental health and how that relates to veterans and people on active duty, but mostly the veteran population. And we definitely want to have you back for that. So
we know that's a particular focus of yours.
Yep, absolutely. And I'd be more than happy to. I appreciate the offer to come on, and I was happy that you reached out. So I'd be more than happy to do it all over again.
Yeah, we are. I don't know how we're going to do this, because this has been a very long conversation, and we left a lot on the table.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we're going to cut this one up. This might be a two-parter across all platforms.
It's all right. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
But thanks again.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it, guys.
So
Thank
great.
you.
This has been amazing.
Yep.
So that was extensive. that was long. That was a long conversation.
He had a lot to say.
He did, and he had quite a varied career.
Yeah.
And he never got to fly.
He never got to fly.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you count dozers.
Well, I mean, he did airborne and air assault, but he never got to. He never got to be a pilot, which is one.
So Maverick lied to him. My recruiter lied to me. Yes. No, it was a good discussion. I've known Lucas sort of. Basically, we know all the same people, and we've been
tangentially.
We've been in the same circles for a long time. But I couldn't really say that I knew him until today. So it was great to finally meet him in person, and I learned a lot about him, obviously, but engineering units.
Yeah.
I've worked a lot with combat engineers, but the other vast swath of what the engineer corps does is kind of a mystery to me. I learned a lot about that tonight, so that was interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you see engineers when you deploy, you see engineers because they're always building, whether they're barriers like he talked about, or buildings for people to stay in or store things in, what have you, or they're destroying said objects that some other engineer built.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine, and you and I, I'm sure, have both done some very mundane and monotonous things, but being tasked with buffering a 16-mile berm to make it a few feet taller, day in and day out.
Okay, we changed our mind. We're done.
Yeah, and they didn't even get to finish. He said that they were like 3/4 of the way done, and then it was change of mission.
Change of mission. I mean, that if that is not an encapsulation of
monotony.
Well, of what Army life can be like.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, kind of the whole hurry up and wait thing, which we did broach during the discussion as well. Because I think of it purely from a maneuver and fires background, because that's where I come from, and it's when I want it now. And so if you're the personnel that are charged with doing the emplacements for all of that, you're going to have to give me a little bit more lead time than now for me to get these dozers from here to there and then get the blade time going and all that. So yeah. And
then I think it was his third tour in Iraq. Then he's essentially got 5 months to stand up a security team with very little experience or even training in that field.
Yeah.
And the people that he's given are those that have been not all. Some of the people that he's been given were basically the undesirables of other units that the commands just kind of said, let's get him off my books. He's somebody else's problem now.
Yeah.
And to form a cohesive team that is effective and works well together to accomplish the mission, that is no small undertaking.
I have a similar experience when I was in Iraq around the same time. This would have been 07, 08, where it was troops from the BSTB, which was the kind of newly minted thing from the modularity, which we discussed, which was the brigade combat team concept that was brand new on its little Bambi legs at this point. The BSTB was the Brigade Special Troops Battalion, so they didn't know where to put all these disparate units, and so
the specialty fields.
They put the chemical, now they call it CBRN, but the chemical platoon, some of the MI folks, the engineers, and it's just this kind of, we'll just put it in one unit and call it a Special Troops Battalion. And so we kind of made an ad hoc team, kind of a civil affairs team is what we were calling it. It's not what it was in reality, and it was the same thing. And that was, just as a callback to a previous episode, that was the unit that Jake Hess was in, that Special Troops Battalion. So he was part of that little team of 20 or so soldiers that some were MP. We had some MPs. We had a few infantry guys that had really gotten in trouble and got shown the door, and we had to find a place for them. We had some CBRN and NBC people, and it turned out to be a pretty good little element, because you had people who were trying to redeem themselves, which can be a valuable thing, and then you had guys who had something to prove, and not in a chip on the shoulder kind of way. So to his point, that's not necessarily, it could be a leadership challenge, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad gig, because those can be good folks. Yeah.
I mean, obviously he made it work and had a highly functional team, and really only one incident towards the end of that tour. So I mean, obviously he was the training that he set up and the way that he was conducting business, especially with the terrain and environmental analysis as he's driving his routes and sending that information forward. I can almost guarantee that nobody else was doing that, especially not from a position like he was in.
Yeah,
I mean, that is awesome.
And that experience, he didn't say this, but I know that was preparing him to be a team sergeant on the CA team.
Yeah.
Years later.
Yeah.
So that's good stuff. It doesn't always feel like it at the time when you're being developed.
Yeah. But he had a wildly varied career.
Yeah.
Because I mean, even then, going off to CA, and then the experiences he had there, across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. Afghanistan thrown in there too.
Yeah.
And then going off to HRC. I mean, every single position that he went to was something almost entirely different than anything that he had ever expected when he first enlisted.
I think people really, unless they've lived there, I think people really, really just don't understand just how big Africa is. And so being a 2 to 4 person, it depends on the mission, but a 2 to 4 person team that's charged basically with the eastern seaboard of a continent, that's a pretty big challenge, to say the least.
Yeah, so, to say the least. To say the least.
We call it the tyranny of distance, just the difficulty of being able to operate in an environment where you just literally can't physically reach out and get into the places that you need to go. Yeah.
Man, he had a hell of a career. he had a wild ride all the way up to the end with his year or 18-month long retirement nightmare.
That sounds horrible.
Oh,
so we hope we haven't scared off any potential.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
people who wanted to join are going to decide to get out early.
I don't think that really anybody's retirement process goes as smoothly as they would have wanted to. There's always going to be little hiccups or bumps along the road, or paperwork that gets rejected and has to be resubmitted, or somebody leaves something on a desk somewhere or what have you. There's always going to be something that's like, really, this is happening to me now? But
that's one of the worst I've heard, for sure.
I mean,
with COVID smack in the middle of it, yeah.
I really don't like the term a perfect storm, because it gets so wildly overused. But that almost does
sounds pretty close.
That does sound about as close to a perfect storm as far as like all the headaches and nightmares and everything with the VA and MEB and the retirement revocation and falling off the Alpha roster. Yeah. I mean,
but this can happen if the bureaucracy is really slow, which is almost redundant, but I repeat myself. This kind of thing can happen when you've submitted paperwork and it's off in the ether, and then the facts on the ground change 60, 90 days later, and you don't know what happened to that round, and now you're like, well, I've got to chamber another round because there's a change of plans here. We're going to mix metaphors. This kind of stuff can happen, which is all the more reason why, God forbid, we should have more efficient systems in place to be able to process these things. And I know everybody used COVID as the catch-all excuse for ineptitude, etc. But
COVID was used as an excuse for far too many things,
and it still is too, by the way,
and still is. But it really did affect people's lives and livelihoods in ways that most people will never be able to fathom. I mean, obviously there's some very horrible effects of COVID, but things like, what he went through, most people would never even think about, being affected by COVID. Well, you're just retiring.
Yeah.
So, man, wow. Got anything else on Mr. Velmer?
I don't think so. He's a very online presence on LinkedIn. It's his social media of choice. So if anybody wants to reach out to him, We want to work with him again very soon on his hobby horse is mental health. You heard him during this discussion. He mentioned it several times.
Yeah.
We kind of skirted around it just in the interest of time, but we definitely want to have him back on for a much more pointed discussion on mental health, which is
we have a side project or special episode project that we're trying to work out the kinks and details for. And we want him to be a part of it, and he has said that he is more than willing to be a part of it. So as soon as we can figure out how that works, we'll keep you guys posted, and you'll be hearing from him again, as well as perhaps some of our other guests.
Some previous guests as well. He's easy to find on LinkedIn. Just look for the big beard. Okay, Free Fire.
What do you got for me?
Welcome to the Free Fire area.
Should we have Free Fire music?
I think we should.
Almost like a dun dun dun, something iconic like that.
I'm thinking more like
not exactly
I'm thinking
that,
more like along the lines of the
clown music.
The scene in Platoon where is it Elias? Willem Dafoe's character, right? He's doing the music that's playing in the background of that
while he's getting torn up.
Yeah, it is an overrated movie, by the way. I generally think Oliver Stone is one of the most overrated directors of all time, but that's not the Free Fire topic.
Okay.
The question preceded by statement. You are Czar Daniel Baker III. If you could extricate one state out of the United States, what state would it be and why?
I'm going to risk insulting fan bases. Wow. First of all, if I was Czar of anything, I would renounce the title Czar and come up with something more clever.
Viceroy.
Something. It definitely wouldn't be Czar. But
Vizier?
Oh, try to think of states that I've been to, which is quite a few of them, but not all of them. I don't want to write somebody off because having never been to the state.
Remember, you're a malevolent ruler, not a benevolent.
It's true. If I have to pick one, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, New Jersey, it's you.
The Garden State?
I'm sorry, New Jersey, it's you. And that's based on solely on some of the heartache and exasperation and trauma that I have been through while traveling through that state. No other reason alone, or no other really significant reason other than just nightmarish travel. And it doesn't matter if it was ground travel and driving myself or air travel. I have not been to Newark Airport in a long time, but I was stuck there for 3 days in, oh gosh, what was it, 99, 2000, something like that? I have made it a point, whenever I do fly, to avoid ever having the chance of
the Garden State
of landing in Newark, New Jersey.
But the Gardens, Dan.
I don't care. And it is based on nothing other than just poor travel experiences. Because, yeah, I don't know if otherwise. I don't know if I would give up a single state, because I am a malevolent dictator and they are mine.
Now get off my lawn.
Now get off my lawn. All right. So what about you?
Yeah. I also actually don't have a great answer. I just so badly want to give Massachusetts back to the Native Americans and say, you guys had Massachusetts, y'all tried, and you've miserably failed. With all due respect, of course. I mean, Taxachusetts.
Taxachusetts?
Yeah.
I've also had nightmarish travel experiences in Massachusetts as well. But that also means giving up Boston, one of our most historic cities, and the Freedom Trail, which is for anybody who's never been to Boston. If you're only there for like 24 hours, then take a couple of hours and go on the Freedom Trail.
Yes,
it is amazing.
It's totally worth it.
It is totally worth it, and that alone should redeem.
And Boston is important to the origin story of this podcast.
That's true.
Which we'll give a teaser, but that's the city that I was in when you and I had the discussion to start this podcast.
Yes, it's true. So, are you trying to rewrite your origin story?
Oh, no,
by getting rid of Massachusetts?
Because Massachusetts would have just been a foreign capital, and I could have been there on a visa, and it would have been
Oh, ridiculous!
And all the mass holes. Where are they going to go? I mean, we have enough illegal immigrants in this country. Why not the mass holes too? Okay,
they could go to Connecticut and Rhode Island. Be part of the bridge and tunnel crew.
Okay. This episode has gone on long enough. And,
oh my goodness! Yes, it has.
If anybody's still watching or listening at this point, we truly appreciate it.
We don't even know how we're going to release this episode because it's going to be so long.
Yeah, we're going to have to break this thing up, and the release is going to be TBD.
But before we sign off, I do want to say this. This will have already happened by the time this episode was released. But guest of the show, episode number 2, Mr. Bill Vernakes, Vietnam veteran. Here in a few days after this recording, he is going to be going on his Vietnam veteran reunion trip that he has tried to do annually for pretty much the last 20-something years. And sometimes it's not annual, sometimes it's every 2 years. But he has told us that this will most likely be the last one because the guys that he served with are
the numbers are dwindling.
They're dwindling. They're aging out. A variety of illnesses, and so every year there's fewer and fewer of them. And so what I would like to say is, for those of you who may be contemplating having a reunion of your own, don't put it off.
Yeah. Because
soon enough, we're going to be that generation that is aging out. And you never know how many of those guys that you could have talked to now or gotten together with now may not be around next year.
Yeah.
Or in 5 years, or in 10 years. So if you're thinking about having a reunion, get the ball rolling.
Yeah. Well said.
So, Bill, this is going to come out after you're already back from your trip, but I hope it was amazing.
Yeah. Well said. I have nothing to add to that. Thanks for watching, listening. We're on all the social media. Please download, subscribe. Please turn on the auto download feature on your podcast. That really helps goose our numbers and really helps the show get out.
Yep.
Spread the word. We appreciate everything.
Yep. YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iVoox.
I don't even know what that is.
iHeartRadio.
Audible.
Audible. We are pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
So you can catch us all over the place. So share. And once again, thank you, Fort Lauderdale. And remember, your service matters.